2. The tables of correspondences at the head of each section consist of a selection of the principal symbols and ideas associated with each Sephira, and have no claim whatsoever to comprehensiveness. They contain, however, the more significant symbols, and are sufficient to enable the student to gain a sound philosophical grasp of the subject, and experiment for himself in the use of the tree as a meditation symbol. 3. The references are taken chiefly from 777, by Aleister Crowley, who got them from the MacGregor Mathers Mrs. Mathers, so far as I have been able to trace his references, for he gives no authorities, drew upon the work of Dr. D. and Sir Edward Kelly, Cornelius Agrippa, Raymond Lully and Pietro da Urbano among the earlier writers. Among the moderns the same material is found scattered through the works of Nor von Rosenroth, Wynne Westcott, Eliphas Levi, Mrs. Atwood, Madame Blavatsky, Anna Kingsford, Mabel Collins, Papoose, Incos, St. Martin, Gerald Massey, G. R. S. Mead, and many others. To some of these it is probable he was indebted, others may have been indebted to him. Some of them were actually members of the Order of the Golden Dawn which he founded. 4. Other sources of information are Fraser's Golden Bough, the works of Wallace Budge, the writings of Drs. Jung and Freud, the translations of Dr. Jowett from the Greek, the Sacred Books of the East series, the Loeb Classical Library, the translation of Plotinus by Stephen McKenna, the translation of the Zohar issued by the Sonsino Press. And last, but by no means the least valuable source of information, the Holy Bible. So much for occult secrecy. 5. It will be seen that the symbols assigned to each Sephira are classified in regular order under certain headings. To understand the significance attached to these different sections by the occultist and the use he makes of them, it is necessary to explain the method of classification in detail. 6. Section 1. The title assigned to the Sephira. Its name is given first in Hebrew and then in English, and the Hebrew spelling appended. The accurate spelling of all proper names used in the Kabbalah is vitally important because of the numerical value attached to them by the Kabbalists and the use made of the significance of these numbers by those who work the numerological methods. I am neither a numerologist nor a mathematician, and I do not therefore propose to comment on that which lies outside the sphere of my knowledge. I merely give the data for the convenience of those who can appreciate its significance. 7. Section 2. The magical image and the symbols associated with each Sephira. The magical image is the mental picture which the occultist builds up to represent the Sephira, and its details yield many significant symbols to meditation. These images are so old, and have been built with such a wealth of magical working, that they are apt to build themselves up of their own accord during meditation upon the Sephiroth. In the course of my own work on the Kabbalah I saw most of them long before I had access to the tables that gave them. In practical working the initiated adept builds them detailed symbolism, and it is a very valuable magical exercise up to practice the visualization of the magical images in their fullest detail. Much of this detail can be gleaned from the accounts I give of each Sephira, but readers who have specialized knowledge of the Eastern or classical pantheons can elaborate these images to any extent. Surrounding them with all the paraphernalia of the gods assigned to each station on the tree. These can be identified through their astrological associations. 8. Section 3. The situation on the tree. This throws an immense amount of light upon any meditation, for it reveals the equilibrium of the spiritual forces working in nature. For instance, Gebura, Mars, and Chesed or Gedula, Jupiter, are opposite each other upon the tree. The warrior king and the wise and benign lawgiver of peace balance each other. Gebura when unbalanced becomes cruelty and oppression, and Gedula when unbalanced suffers evil to multiply. 9. Section 4. The Yetziratic text. This consists of the description of the sphere or path given in the Sefer Yetzirah, or Book of Formations. The translation I have used is that of Wynne Westcott. 10. These descriptions are exceedingly cryptic, but they will from time to time yield a flash of inspiration, and undoubtedly contain the essence of the Kabbalistic philosophy. 11. Section 5. Descriptive titles. A catalogue of the names that have been applied to that particular sapphira in the rabbinical literature. These throw great light on the subject and are also useful to the student for purposes of reference when tracing out the ideas associated with a particular sapphira. 12. Section 6. The names of power assigned to each sapphira. The God name represents the most spiritual form of the force and is conceived of as representing the functioning of that force in the kingdom of Atziluth, the highest of the four kingdoms of the Kabbalists. 13. The archangelic names represent the functioning of a force in Bria, the kingdom of the higher mind, are the archetypal ideas. 14. Angelic choirs correspond to the kingdom of or the astral plane, and the mundane chakras are representatives of each force in the kingdom of Asaya, the material plane. 15. What I call in my tables the spiritual experience assigned to each sapphira is called by Crowley the magical power, whereas this term may be rightly assigned to the 22 paths, it is misleading when applied to the Sephiroth. I have changed the term in relation to the Sephiroth themselves, but retained it in reference to the paths for reasons which will presently be seen. 16. Section 7. The virtues and vices assigned to each sapphira of the tree. These indicate the qualities necessary in order to take the initiation of that grade, and the form that is taken by any unbalanced force in that sphere. In the highest grade of all, before form is developed, there is no correspondence. 17. Section 8. Correspondence in microcosm. The microcosm, which is man, corresponds with the Sephirothic macrocosm, and is important from many practical standpoints, particularly that of spiritual healing and astrology. 18. Section 9. The four suits of the tarot pack. The assignation of the tarot cards to the tree opens up immense ranges of practical importance and forms the philosophical basis of the divinatory art. 19. If the reader keeps these explanations in mind, he will be able to follow the lines of reasoning and illusion developed in the elucidation of the symbolism assigned to each sapphira. 20. There is an immense work to be done in correlating the different polytheistic pantheons and the angelologies of Christian, Hebrew, and Mohammedan faiths with the classifications of the tree. This has been done tentatively by Crowley, and is, I fancy, original work and not derived from Mathers. Its implications are not altogether clear to me, and I doubt if I could subscribe to all of them. An immensely wide range of scholarship is necessary for the satisfactory accomplishment of this branch, a range of scholarship which I do not possess. I shall therefore content myself with touching upon such points as have come within the range of my knowledge and make no attempt in the present pages at an ordered classification. 21. Section 10. The flashing colors. This is only of use to advanced students who possess the necessary keys. Kether, the first sapphira. Title, Kether, the crown. Hebrew, Kaf, Tau, Resh. Magical image, an ancient bearded king seen in profile. Situation on the tree, at the head of the pillar of equilibrium in the supernal triangle. Yetziratic text. The first path is called the admirable or hidden intelligence because it is the light giving the power of comprehension of the first principle, which hath no beginning. And it is the primal glory, because no created being can attain to its essence. Titles given to Kether, existence of existences. Concealed of the concealed. Ancient of ancients. Ancient of days. The primordial point. The point within the circle. The Most High. The vast countenance. The white head. The head which is not. Macroprosopos. Amen. Lux occulta. Lux interna. He. God name, Ihi. Archangel, Metatron. Order of angels, holy living creatures. Chayoth ha-Kadesh. Mundane chakra, Rashith ha-Gilgalim. Prima mobile. First swirlings. Spiritual experience, union with God. Virtue, attainment. Completion of the great work. Vice. Correspondence in microcosm, the cranium. The Sa. Yekada. The divine spark. The thousand-petaled lotus. Symbols, the point. The crown. The swastika. Tarot cards, the four aces. Ace of wands, root of the powers of fire. Ace of cups, root of the powers of water. Ace of swords, root of the powers of air. Ace of pentacles, root of the powers of earth. Color in Atziluth, brilliance. Berach, pure white brilliance. Yetzirah, pure white brilliance. Asaya, white, flecked gold. 1. Kether, the crown, is placed at the head of the middle pillar of equilibrium, and from it depend backwards the negative veils of existence. I have already written concerning the use of these negative veils as a background to thought, so I will not repeat myself upon this point, but remind the reader that Kether, the first manifest, represents the primal crystallization into manifestation of that which was hitherto unmanifest and therefore unknowable by us. Concerning the root from which Kether springs we can know nothing, but concerning Kether itself we can know something. It may be for us at our stage of development the great unknown, but it is not the great unknowable. The mind of the Magus must compass it in his higher visions. In my own experiences with the operation known as rising on the planes, which consists in carrying consciousness up the middle pillar by means of concentration on the successive symbols and the paths, Kether, on the one occasion when I touched its fringe, appeared as a blinding white light, in which all thought went completely blank. 2. In Kether there is no form but only pure being, whatever that may be. It is, one might say, a latency only 1 degree removed from non-existence. Such concepts must necessarily be vague, and I am ill-equipped to give them such definiteness as they might possess, but I am quite satisfied that we should recognize grades of becoming, and that the crude differentiation of being and non-being does not represent the facts. With manifested existence there come into being the pairs of opposites, but in Kether there is no division into the pairs of opposites, which must wait for their manifestation till Chakma and Bina are emanated. 3. Kether, then, is the one, and existed before there was any reflection of itself to serve it for an image in consciousness and set up polarity. We must believe that it transcended all known laws of manifestation by existing alone, without reaction. But when we speak of Kether it must be remembered that we do not mean a person, but a state of existence, and this state of existing substance must have been utterly inert, pure being without activity, until the activity began which emanated Chakma. 4. The human mind, knowing no other mode of existence than that of form and activity, has the greatest difficulty in obtaining any adequate concept of an entirely formless state of passivity which is nevertheless most distinctly not non-being. Yet this effort must be made if we are to understand cosmic philosophy in its fundamentals. We must not draw the veils of negative existence in front of Kether or we shall condemn ourselves to a perpetual unresolved duality. God and the devil will forever war in our cosmos, and there can be no finality to their conflict. We must train the mind to conceive the state of pure being without attributes or activities. We may think of it as the blinding white light, undifferentiated into rays by the prism of form, or we may think of it as the darkness of interstellar space, which is nothing, yet contains the potentialities of all things. These symbols, dwelt upon by the inner eye, are a greater aid to the understanding of Kether than any amount of exact philosophical definitions. We cannot define Kether, we can only indicate it. 5. It is a continual surprise and illumination to discover the extraordinary significance of the hints contained in the tables of correspondences, and the manner in which they lead the mind on from concept to concept when pondered upon. The first Sapphira is called the crown, be it noted, not the head. Now the crown is something superimposed upon the head, and this gives us a clear hint that Kether is of our cosmos, but not in it. We also find its microcosmic correspondence in the thousand-petaled lotus, the Sahasrara chakra, which is in the aura immediately above the head. This, I think, teaches us clearly that the innermost spiritual essence of anything, whether man or world, is never in actual manifestation, but is always the underlying, behind-standing basis or root whence all springs. Belonging in fact to a different dimension, a different order of being. It is this concept of the different types of existence which is fundamental to esoteric philosophy, and must always be borne in mind when considering the invisible kingdoms of the magician, or operative occultist. 6. In the Vedanta philosophy, Kether would undoubtedly equate with Parabrahman, Chakma with Brahman, and Bina with Mula Prakriti. In the other great systems of human thought, Kether equates with their primary concept and may be taken as the father of the gods. If for them the universe originated in space, then Kether is the sky god. If it originated in water, Kether is the primordial ocean. Always we find in connection with Kether the sense of formlessness and timelessness. The gods of Kether are terrible gods which eat their children, for Kether, although the parent of all, reabsorbs the universe back into itself at the end of an epoch of evolution. 7. Kether is the abyss whence all arose, and back into which it will fall at the end of its epoch. Therefore in exoteric myths associated with Kether we find the implication of non-existence. In esoteric concepts, however, we learn that such a concept is erroneous. Kether is the intensest form of existence, pure being unlimited by form or reaction. But it is existence of another type than that to which we are accustomed, and therefore it appears to us as non-existence because it conforms to none of the requirements we are accustomed to think of as determining existence. This concept of other modes of existence is implicit in our philosophy and must ever be borne in mind, for it is the key to Kether, and Kether is the key to the tree of life. 8. The Yetziratic text descriptive of Kether, like all the sayings of the Seper Yetzirah, is a hidden saying. It calls Kether the hidden intelligence, and this appellation is confirmed by several other of the titles given to Kether in Kabbalistic literature. It is the concealed of the concealed, the inscrutable height, the head which is not. Here again we get confirmation of the idea that the crown is above the head of the celestial man, Adam Kadmon, that pure being stands behind manifestation and is not absorbed into it, but rather emanates or projects it. As we express ourselves in our works, so does Kether express itself in manifestation. But a man's works do not constitute his personality, but are the expression of its natural activity. So it is with Kether. Its mode of existence is not manifested, but is the cause of manifestation. 9. We have hitherto considered Kether in Atziluth, that is to say, as its essential and primal essence. We must now consider Kether as it appears in the three other kingdoms distinguished by the Kabbalists. 10. Each kingdom or plane of manifestation has its primary form. Matter, for instance, is in all probability primarily electric, and this is expressed by the esotericists as the etheric subplane which lies behind the four elemental planes of earth, air, fire, and water. Or in other words, the four conditions of dense matter, solid, liquid, gaseous, and etheric. 11. The Kabbalists conceive of the tree as existing in each of the four kingdoms of Atziluth, pure spirit, Bria, archetypal mind. Yetzirah, astral picture consciousness, and Asaya, the material world in both its dense and subtler aspects. The operations of the forces of each Sephira are represented in each world under the presidency of a divine name, or word of power, and these words give the keys to the operations of practical occultism upon the planes. The God name represents the action of the Sephira in the world of Atziluth, pure spirit. When the occultist invokes the forces of a Sephira by the God name, it means that he desires to contact its most abstract essence, that he is seeking the spiritual principle underlying and conditioning that particular mode of manifestation. It is a maxim of white occultism that every operation should commence with the invocation of the God name of the sphere in which the operation is to take place. This ensures that the operation shall be in harmony with cosmic law. The balance of natural force is not lightly to be overset. It is essential to the safety of the magician that he should conduct his operations in accordance with cosmic law. Therefore he must seek to understand the spiritual principle involved in every problem and work it out accordingly. Every operation, therefore, must have its final unification or resolution in Ihi, the God name of Kether in Atziluth. 12. The invocation of deity under the name of Ihi, that is to say the affirmation of pure being, eternal, unchanging, without attributes or activities, underlying, maintaining, and conditioning all, is the primary formula of all magical working. It is only when the mind is imbued with the realization of this endless unchanging being of the utmost concentration and intensity that it can have any realization of limitless power. Energy derived from any other source is a limited and partial energy. In Kether alone is the pure source of all energy. The operations of the magician that aim at the concentrating of energy, and what operations do not, must always start with Kether, because here we touch the upwelling force arising from the great unmanifest, the reservoir of limitless power. It is through Kether, from the great unmanifest hidden behind the veils of negative existence, that power is drawn. If we draw power from any specialized sphere of nature, we are, as it were, robbing Peter to pay Paul. The power has come from somewhere, and gone somewhere, and it has to be accounted for at the final reckoning. It is for this reason that it has been held that the magician pays in suffering for what he wins by magical means. This is true if his operation is performed in any of the lower spheres of nature, but if it starts in the Kether of Atziluth, he is drawing unmanifest force into manifestation. He is adding to the resources of the universe, and provided he keeps the forces in equilibrium, there need be no untoward reaction and no payment in suffering for the use of the magical powers. 13. This is a point of tremendous practical importance. Students have been taught that the three supernals, Kether, Chakma, and Bina, are beyond the range of practical working so long as we are in incarnation. True, they are beyond the range of brain consciousness, but they are the essential basis of all magical calculations, and if we do not work from this basis we have no cosmic foundation. But are poised between heaven and earth and find no place of rest or security, but must ever maintain the magical stresses that keep the astral forms in being. 14. The great difference between Christian Science and the cruder forms of New Thought and autosuggestion is that it starts all its workings in the divine life. And utterly irrational though its attempts to philosophize its system may be, its methods are empirically sound. The occultist, and especially the practitioner of ceremonial magic, if uninstructed in this discipline, tends to start his operation without any reference to cosmic law or spiritual principle. Consequently the astral images he forms are like foreign bodies in the organism of the celestial man, or macrocosm. And all the forces of nature are spontaneously directed towards the elimination of the foreign substance and the restoration of the normal equilibrium of stresses. Nature fights the magician tooth and nail, consequently, whosoever has resorted to unconsecrated magic may never lay down his sword, but must always be on the defensive in order to maintain that which he has won. But the adept who starts his work in the Kether of Atziluth, that is to say in spiritual principle, and works that principle downwards to its expression on the planes of form, employing power drawn from the unmanifest for this purpose, has made his operation a part of the cosmic process, and nature is with him instead of against him. 15. We cannot hope to understand the nature of Kether in Atziluth, but we can open our consciousness to its influence, and its influence is very powerful and gives a strange sense of eternity and immortality. We may know when the invocation of a he in its pure white brilliance has been effectual, because we shall find ourselves realizing with complete conviction the utter impermanence and insignificance of the planes of form and the supreme importance of the one life which conditions all form as clay in the hands of the potter. 16. Meditation upon Kether gives us an intuitive realization that the issue of an operation does not matter in the very least. Let the dirt play with the dirt if it pleases the dirt. Once that realization has been obtained we have lordship over the astral images and can turn them this way and that as it pleases us. It is only when the operator cares nothing for the outcome of the operation on the physical plane that he attains to this complete lordship over the astral images. He is concerned simply and solely with the handling of forces and the bringing of them through into manifestation in form, but he does not care what form the forces may ultimately assume, he leaves that to them. For they will assuredly assume the form that is most consonant with their nature, and thus be truer to cosmic law than any design which his limited knowledge could assign to them. This is the real key to all magical operations, and their sole justification, for we may not turn the universe round and about to suit our whim or convenience. but are only justified in the deliberate work of magic when we work with the great tide of evolving life in order to bring ourselves into fullness of life whatever form that experience or manifestation may take. I am come that they might have life, and that they might have it more abundantly, said our Lord, and that should be the word of the magician. Life, and life alone, should be his word, and not any specialized manifestation of it as wisdom, power, nor even love. 17. Those who have followed the preceding discussion point by point may now be able to see some significance in the cryptic words of the Yetziratic text assigned to Kether. The words, hidden intelligence, convey a hint of the unmanifest nature of the existence of Kether, which is confirmed by the statement that no created being can attain to its essence. That is to say, no being using as its vehicle of consciousness any organism of the planes of form. When, however, consciousness has been exalted to the point where it transcends thought, it receives from the primal glory the power of comprehension of the first principle, or in other words, then shall we know even as we are known. 18. Ihi, I am that I am, pure being, is the God name of Kether, and its magical image is an ancient bearded king seen in profile. The Zohar says of this ancient bearded king that he is all right side. We do not see the magical image of Kether full face, that is to say complete, but only partially. There is an aspect which must ever be hidden from us, like the hidden side of the moon. This side of Kether is the side that is towards the unmanifest, which the nature of our manifested consciousness prevents us from comprehending, and which must ever be a sealed book to us. But accepting this limitation we may gaze in contemplation upon the aspect of Kether, the profile of the ancient bearded king, presented to us reflected downwards into form. 19. Ancient is this king, the ancient of ancients, the ancient of days, for he was from the beginning, when countenance beheld not countenance. A king he is, because he rules all things according to his supreme and unquestioned will. In other words, it is the nature of Kether that conditions all things, because all things are evolved from it. Bearded he is, because in the curious symbolism of the rabbis every hair of his beard has significance. 20. The manifestation of the forces of Kether in Bria, the world of archetypal mind, is said to be through the archangel Metatron, the prince of countenances, who tradition avers was the teacher of Moses. The Sefer Yetzirah says of the 10th path, Makath, that it causes an influence to flow from the prince of countenances, the archangel of Kether, and is the source of illumination of all the lights of the universe. Thus plainly do we learn that not only does spirit flow out into manifestation in matter, but matter by its own energy draws spirit into manifestation, an important point for the practitioner of magic. For it teaches him that he is justified in his operations and that man is not required to wait upon the word of the Lord, but may call upon God to hear him. 21. The angels of Kether, operating in the Yetziratic world, are the Chayoth HaKadesh, holy living creatures, and their name carries the mind to the chariot vision of Ezekiel and the 4 holy creatures before the throne. The fact that the 4 aces of the tarot, assigned to Kether, are regarded as representing the roots of the 4 elements of earth, air, fire, and water further bears out this association. We may look, then, to Kether as the fountainhead of the elements. This concept clears up many occult and metaphysical difficulties that occur if we limit their operation to the astral plane and regard elementals as little better than devils, as some schools of transcendental thought appear to do. 22. The whole question of the angels, archons, and elementals is a very vexed and very important one in occultism, because its practical application to magic is immediate. Christian thought can tolerate with an effort the idea of archangels, but the ministering spirits, the messengers who are flames of fire, and the heavenly builders, are alien to its theology. God, alone and in an instant, made the heavens and earth. The great architect of the universe is also the bricklayer. Not so does esoteric science. The initiate knows the legions of spiritual beings who are agents of God's will and the vehicles of creative activity. It is through these that he works, by the grace of their ruling archangel. But an archangel cannot be conjured by any spell, however potent. Rather is it that when we effect an operation of the sphere of a particular Sephira, the archangel works through us for the fulfillment of its mission. The art of the magician therefore lies in aligning himself with cosmic force in order that the operation he desires to perform may come about as a part of the working of cosmic activities. If he be truly purified and dedicated, this will be the case with all his desires, and if he be not truly purified and dedicated, he is no adept, and his word is not a word of power. 23. It is interesting to note that in the world of Asaya the title of the sphere of Kether is Rashith ha-Gilgalim, or First Swirlings. Thus indicating that the rabbis were acquainted with the nebular theory before science was acquainted with the telescope. The manner in which the ancients deduced the basic facts of cosmogony by purely intuitive means and the use of the method of correspondences. Centuries before the invention and perfection of the instruments of precision which enabled modern man to make the same discoveries from another angle, must be a matter of perpetual amazement to anyone who comes to the traditional philosophy unbiased. 24. As above, so below. The microcosm corresponds to the macrocosm, and we must therefore seek in man the Kether above the head which shines with a pure white brilliance in Adam Kadmon, the heavenly man. The rabbis call it the Yekida, the divine spark, the Egyptians call it the Sa, the Hindus call it the thousand-petaled lotus. But under all these names we have the same idea, the nucleus of pure spirit which emanates but does not indwell its many manifestations upon the planes of form. 25. It is said that never while in incarnation can we rise to the consciousness of Kether in Atziluth and retain the physical vehicle intact against our return. Even as Enoch walked with God and was not, so the man that has the vision of Kether is disrupted so far as the vehicle of incarnation is concerned. Why this must be is readily discerned when we remember that we cannot enter into a mode of consciousness save by reproducing it in ourselves, just as music means nothing to us unless the heart sings with it. If therefore we reproduce in ourselves the mode of being of that which has neither form nor activities, it follows that we must free ourselves from form and activity. If we succeed in doing so, that which is held together by the form mode of consciousness will fall apart and return to its elements. Thus dissolved, it cannot be reassembled by returning consciousness. Therefore when we aspire to the vision of Kether in Atziluth we must be prepared to enter into the light and come not forth again. 26. This does not imply that nirvana is annihilation, as an ignorant rendering of Eastern philosophy has taught European thought, but it does imply a complete change of mode or dimension. What we shall be when we find ourselves ranked with the holy living creatures, we do not know, and none who achieved the vision of Kether in Atziluth have returned to tell us. But tradition avers that there are those who have done so, and that they are intimately concerned with the evolution of humanity and are the prototypes of those supermen concerning whom all races have a tradition. A tradition which, unfortunately, of recent years has been cheapened and debased by pseudo-occult teaching. Whatever these beings may or may not be, it is safe to say that they have neither astral form nor human personality, but are as flames in the fire which is God. The state of the soul which has attained nirvana may best be likened to a wheel that has lost its rim and whose spokes have become rays that penetrate and interpenetrate the whole creation. A center of radiation to whose influence no limit is set save that of its own dynamism, and which maintains its identity as a nucleus of energy. 27. The spiritual experience assigned to Kether is said to be union with God. This is the end and aim of all mystical experience, and if we look for any other goal we are as those who build a house in the world of illusion. Anything that holds him back from the straight path to this goal is felt by the mystic to be a bond that binds, and as such to be broken. All that holds consciousness to form, all desires other than the one desire, these are to him evils, and from the standpoint of his philosophy he is right, and to act otherwise would invalidate his technique. 28. But this is not the only test which the mystic has to face. It is required of him that he shall fulfill the requirements of the planes of form before he is free to commence his withdrawal and escape from form. There is a left-hand path that leads to Kether, the Kether of the Cliffeth, which is the kingdom of chaos. If he embarks upon the mystic path prematurely it is thither he goes, and not to the kingdom of light. To the man who is naturally of the mystic path the discipline of form is uncongenial. And it is the subtlest of temptations to abandon the struggle with the life of form that resists his mastery and retreat back up the plains before the nadir has been rounded and the lessons of form have been learnt. Form is the matrix in which the fluidic consciousness is held till it acquires an organization proof against dispersal, till it becomes a nucleus of individuality differentiated out of the amorphous sea of pure being. If the matrix be broken too soon, before the fluidic consciousness had become set as an organized system of stresses stereotyped by repetition, consciousness settles back again into formlessness. Even as the clay returns to mud if freed from the supporting restraint of the mold before it has set. If there is a mystic whose mysticism produces mundane incapacity or any form of dissociation of consciousness, we know that the mold had been broken too soon for him. And he must return to the discipline of form until its lesson has been learnt and his consciousness has attained a coherent and cohesive organization that not even nirvana can disrupt. Let him hew wood and carry water in the service of the temple if he will, but let him not profane its holy place with his pathologies and immaturities. 29. The virtue assigned to Kether is that of attainment, the completion of the great work, to use a term borrowed from the alchemists. Without completion there can be no attainment, and without attainment no completion. Good intentions weigh light in the scale of cosmic justice, it is by our completed work that we are known. T-Ru, we have all eternity in which to complete it, but complete it we must, even to the final yod. There is no mercy in perfect justice save that which gives us leave to try again. 30. Kether, viewed from the standpoint of form, is the crown of the kingdom of oblivion. Unless we have realization of the nature of the life of the pure white light we shall have little temptation to strive for the crown which is not of this order of being at all. And if we have this realization, then are we free from the bondage of manifestation and can speak to all forms as one having authority. Chakma, the second Sephira. Title, Chakma, Wisdom. Hebrew, Cheth, Kof, Mem, He. Magical image, a bearded male figure. Situation on the tree, at the head of the pillar of mercy in the supernal triangle. Yetziratic text, the second path is called the illuminating intelligence. It is the crown of creation, the splendor of unity, equaling it. It is exalted above every head, and is named by Kabbalists the second glory. Titles given to Chakma, power of Yetzirah. Ah. Abba. The supernal father. Tetragrammaton. Yod of Tetragrammaton. God name, Jehovah. Archangel, Ratziel. Order of angels, Ophanim, wheels. Mundane chakra, Masloth, the zodiac. Spiritual experience, the vision of God face to face. Virtue, devotion. Vice. Correspondence in microcosm, the left side of the face. Symbols, the lingam. The phallus. The Yod of Tetragrammaton. The inner robe of glory. The standing stone. The tower. The uplifted rod of power. The straight line. Tarot cards, the 4 twos. 2 of wands, dominion. 2 of cups, love. 2 of swords, peace restored. 2 of pentacles, harmonious change. Color in Atziluth, pure soft blue. Berach, gray. Yetzirah, pearl gray, iridescent. Asaya, white flecked with red, blue, and yellow. 1. Every phase of evolution commences by being in a state of unstable force and proceeds through organization to equilibrium. Equilibrium having been achieved, no further development is possible without once more oversetting the stability and passing through a phase of contending forces. As we have already seen, Kether is the point formulated in the void. According to Euclid's definition, a point has position but no dimensions. If, however, a point may be conceived of as extending through space, it becomes a line. The nature of the organization and evolution of the 3 supernals is so remote from our experience that we can only conceive of them symbolically. But if we conceive of the primordial point which is Kether as being extended into the line which is Chakma, we shall have as adequate a symbolic representation as we may hope to achieve at our present state of understanding. 2. This fourth flowing energy, represented by the straight line or the uplifted rod of power, is essentially dynamic. It is, in fact, the primary dynamism, for we cannot conceive the crystallization of Kether in space as a dynamic process. It partakes rather of a staticism of the limiting of the formless and free in the bonds of form, tenuous as that form may be in our eyes. 3. The limits of the organization of such a form having been reached, the ever-inflowing force of the unmanifest transcends its limitations, demanding fresh modes of development, establishing fresh relationships and stresses. It is this outdriving of unorganized, uncompensated force which is Chakma, and because Chakma is a dynamic Sapphira, ever outflowing in boundless energy, we do well to look upon it as a channel for the passage of force rather than a receptacle for the storage of force. For, Chakma is not an organizing Sapphira, but it is the great stimulator of the universe. It is from Chakma that Bina, the third Sapphira, receives its influx of emanation, and Bina is the first of the organizing, stabilizing Sephiroth. It is not possible to understand either of the paired Sephiroth without considering its mate, therefore in order to understand Chakma we shall have to say something about Bina. Let it be noted, then, that Bina is assigned to the planet Saturn and is called the Superior Mother. 5. In Bina and Chakma we have the archetypal positive and negative. The primordial maleness and femaleness, established while countenance beheld not countenance and manifestation was incipient. It is from these primary pairs of opposites that the pillars of the universe spring, between which is woven the web of manifestation. 6. As we have already noted, the tree of life is a diagrammatic representation of the universe on which the positive and negative, male and female aspects are represented by the two flanking pillars of mercy and severity. It may seem strange to uninstructed thought that the title of mercy should be given to the male or positive pillar, and that of severity to the female pillar. But when it is realized that the dynamic male type of force is the stimulator of upbuilding and evolution, and that the female type of force is the builder of forms, it will be seen that the nomenclature is apt. For form, although it is the builder and organizer, is also the limiter. Each form that is built must in turn be outgrown, lose its usefulness, and so become a hindrance to evolving life, and therefore the bringer in of dissolution and decay, which lead on to death. The father is the giver of life. But the mother is the giver of death, because her womb is the gate of ingress to matter, and through her life is ensouled in form, and no form can be either infinite or eternal. Death is implicit in birth. 7. It is between these two polarizing aspects of manifestation, the supernal father and the supernal mother, that the web of life is woven, souls going back and forth between them like a weaver's shuttle. In our individual lives, in our physiological rhythms, and in the history of the rise and fall of nations, we observe the same rhythmic periodicity. 8. In these, the first paired Sephiroth, we have the key to sex, the pair of biological opposites, maleness and femaleness. But the pairing of opposites does not only occur in type, it also occurs in time, and we have alternating epochs in our lives, in our physiological processes, and in the history of nations, during which activity and passivity, construction and destruction alternately prevail. The knowledge of the periodicity of these cycles is part of the secret, guarded, ancient wisdom of the initiates, and is worked out astrologically and kabbalistically. 9. The magical image of Chakma and the symbols assigned to it bear out this idea. The magical image is that of a bearded male, bearded to indicate maturity, the father who has proved his manhood, not the untried virgin male. The symbolic language speaks plainly, and the lingam of the Hindus and the phallus of the Greeks are the male generative organ in their respective tongues. The standing stone, the tower, and the uplifted rod all signify the same virile member at its most potent. 10. It must not be thought, however, that Chakma is a phallic or sexual symbol and nothing else. It is primarily a dynamic or positive symbol, for maleness is a form of dynamic force, just as femaleness is a form of static, latent, or potential force, inert till stimulus be given. The whole is greater than the part, and Chakma and Bina are wholes of which sex is a part. In understanding the relationship which sex has to polarizing force as a whole, we find the key to the right understanding of sex, and we can assess against a cosmic standard the teachings of psychology and morality relating thereto. We can also see how it comes about that the subconscious mind of man can represent the sexes by so many and such diverse symbols, as the Freudians aver, and why sublimation of the sexual instinct is possible, as the moralists aver. Manifestation, then, is sexual insomuch as it takes place always in terms of the pairs of opposites, and sex is cosmic and spiritual because it has its roots in the three supernals. We must learn not to dissociate the airy flower from the earthy root, for the flower that is cut off from its root fades, and its seeds are barren. Whereas the root, secure in Mother Earth, can produce flower after flower and bring their fruit to maturity. Nature is greater and truer than conventional morality, which is often nothing but taboo and totemism. Happy the people whose morality embodies nature's laws, for they shall lead harmonious lives and increase and multiply and possess the earth. Unhappy the people whose morality is a savage system of taboos designed to propitiate an imaginary Moloch of a deity, for they shall be sterile and sinful. Equally unhappy the people whose morality outrages the sanctity of natural process and in plucking the flower has no regard for the fruit, for they shall be diseased of body and corrupt of estate. 11. In Chakma, then, we must see both the creative word which said, "Let there be light," and the lingam of Shiva and the phallus adored by the Bacchantes. We must learn to recognize dynamic force, and revere it wherever we see it, for its god name is Jehovah Tetragrammaton. We see it in the spread tail of the peacock and the iridescence of the neck of the dove. But we also hear it in the yowl of the tomcat and smell it in the stench of the he-goat. Likewise we meet it in the colonizing adventurers of the most virile epochs of our history, notably those of Elizabeth and Victoria, both women. We see it again in the man diligent in his toil, strenuous in his profession, in order that his home may be provided for. All these are types of Chakma, whose additional titles are Abba Father. In all these manifestations let us see the Father, the giver of life to the unborn as well as the male lusting after its mate, thus we shall get a truer perspective in matters of sex. The Victorian attitude, in its reaction against restoration grossness, practically arrived at the standard of the most primitive tribes, who, travelers tell us, do not associate the union of the sexes with the production of offspring. 12. The color of Chakma is said to be gray, in its higher aspects, pearl gray, iridescent. In this we see the veiling of the pure white light of Kether descending in its path of emanation towards Bina, whose color is black. 13. The mundane chakra, or direct physical manifestation of Chakma, is said to be the zodiac, called in Hebrew Masloth. We thus see that the ancient rabbis rightly understood the process of the evolution of our solar system. 14. The Yetziratic text assigned to Chakma is, as usual, exceedingly obscure in its wording, nevertheless we can gather from it certain illuminating hints. The second path, as it denominates Chakma, it calls the illuminating intelligence. We have already referred to the creative word which said, "Let there be light." Among the symbols assigned to Chakma in 777 foot, Mather's Crowley system, is that of the inner robe of glory, a Gnostic term. These two ideas, taken together, lead on the imagination to the idea of the ensouling life, the illuminating spirit. It is the male force that implants the fecundating spark in the passive ovum on all planes and transforms its inert latency into the active upbuilding of growth and evolution. It is the dynamic force of life, which is spirit, that ensouls the clay of physical form and constitutes the inner robe of glory that is worn by all beings in whom is the breath of life. Force embodied in form, and form ensouled by force, is signified by the illuminating intelligence and the inner robe of glory. 15. The Yetziratic text also calls Chakma the crown of creation, thus implying that, like Kether, it is overshadowing and external to, rather than immanent and absorbed in, the manifested universe. Actually it is the virile force of Chakma which gives the impulse to manifestation, and thus is prior to manifestation itself. The voice of the Logos was crying, "Let there be light," long ere the waters were separated from the waters and the firmament appeared. This idea is further borne out in the phrase of the Yetziratic text which speaks of Chokmah as the splendor of unity, equaling it, thus clearly indicating its affinity to Kether, unity, rather than to the planes of dualistic form. The word splendor, as used here, clearly indicates an emanation, or shining forth, and teaches us to think of Chokmah as the emanating influence of pure being rather than as a thing in itself. This again leads us on to a truer apprehension of sex. Let it be made quite clear, however, that the sphere of Chokmah has nothing to do with fertility cults as such, save that maleness, dynamic force, is the primary life-giver and caller into manifestation. Though the higher and lower manifestations of dynamic force are the same in essence, they are upon different levels. Priapus is not identical with Jehovah. Nevertheless, the root of Priapus is to be found in Jehovah, and the manifestation of God the Father is to be found in Priapus, as is indicated by the fact that the rabbis call Chokmah the Yod of Tetragrammaton. And Yod is identical with Lingam in their phraseology. 16. It is curious that the Sefer Yetzirah says of two of the Sephiroth that they are exalted above every head, a contradictory statement. Yet in the fact that it is made with regard to Chokmah and Mawkath there is illumination for us if we ponder its significance. Chokmah is the supernal father, Mawkath is the inferior mother, and the text which declares her exaltation above every head also says that she sitteth upon the throne of Bina, the superior mother, the negative counterpart of Chokmah. Now Chokmah is the most abstract form of force, and Mawkath is the densest form of matter, so in this statement we have a hint that each of this pair of extreme opposites is the supreme manifestation of its own type. And both are equally holy in their different ways. 17. We must distinguish between the fertility rite, the vitality rite, and the illumination or inspiration rite, which calls down the Pentecostal tongues of flame. The fertility cult aims at plain and simple reproduction, whether of flocks, fields, or wives. It belongs to Yesod, and has nothing whatever to do with the vitality cult, which belongs to Netzach, the sphere of Venus Aphrodite. This concerns certain very important esoteric teaching on the subject of the vitalising or magnetic influences which the sexes have on each other, quite apart from physical intercourse, and will be dealt with when Netzach, the sphere of Venus, comes to be considered. 18. The rite of Chokmah, if such it can be called, is concerned with the influx of cosmic energy. It is formless, being the pure impulse of dynamic creation, and being formless, the creation it gives rise to can assume any and every form. Hence the possibility of sublimating creative force from its purely priapic aspect. 19. So far as I know, there is no formal magical ceremony of any of the three supernals. They can only be contacted through participation in their essential nature. Kether, pure being, is contacted when we win to realization of the nature of existence without parts, attributes or dimensions. This experience is aptly called the trance of annihilation, and those who experience it walk with God and are not, for God has taken them. Therefore is the spiritual experience assigned to Kether that of divine union, of which it is said that those who experience it enter into the light and come not forth again. 20. In order to contact Chokmah we must experience the rush of the dynamic cosmic energy in its pure form, an energy so tremendous that mortal man is fused into disruption by it. It is recorded that when Semele, mother of Dionysus, saw Zeus her divine lover in his god form as the thunderer, she was blasted and burnt, and gave birth to her divine son prematurely. The spiritual experience assigned to Kether is the vision of God face to face, and God, Jehovah, said to Moses, "Thou canst not look upon my face and live." 21. But although the sight of the Divine Father blasts mortals as with fire, the Divine Son comes familiarly among them and can be invoked by the appropriate rites, Bacchanalia in the case of the son of Zeus, and the Eucharist in the case of the Son of Jehovah. Thus we see that there is a lower form of manifestation, which shows us the Father, but that this rite owes its validity solely to the fact that it derives its illuminating intelligence, its inner robe of glory, from the Father, Chokmah. 22. The grade of initiation corresponding to Chokmah is said to be that of Magus, and the magical weapons assigned to that grade are the phallus and the inner robe of glory. This teaches us that these symbols have a microcosmic or psychological significance as well as a macrocosmic or mystical one. The inner robe of glory must surely signify the inner light which lighteth every man that cometh into the world, the spiritual vision whereby the mystic discerns spiritual things. The subjective form of the illuminating intelligence referred to in the Yetziratic text. 23. The phallus or lingam is given as one of the magical weapons of the initiate operating the grade of Chakma. This tells us that a knowledge of the spiritual significance of sex and the cosmic significance of polarity concern this grade. Anyone who can see beneath the surface in things mystical and magical cannot fail to be aware of the fact that in the understanding of the tremendous and mysterious potency, which we call sex in one of its manifestations, lies the key to a very great deal. It is not for nothing that sexual imagery pervades the visions of the seer, from the Song of Songs to the interior castle. 24. It must not be thought from this that I advocate orgiastic rites as the way of initiation. But I may as well say plainly that without the right understanding of the esoteric aspect of sex, the path is a blind alley. Freud spoke the truth to this generation when he pointed to sex as a key to psychopathology. He erred, in my opinion, when he made it the only key to the nine-chambered soul of man. As there can be no health of subconsciousness without harmony of sex life, so there can be no positive or dynamic working upon the plane of superconsciousness unless the laws of polarity are understood and observed. To many mystics, seeking refuge from matter and spirit, this may be a hard saying, but experience will prove it a true one, therefore it must be said, though there may be few thanks for saying it. 25. The tremendous downrush of the Chakma force invoked through the divine four-lettered name comes from the macrocosmic Yod to the microcosmic Yod, and is then sublimated. Unless the subconscious mind is free from dissociations and repressions, and all the parts of the many-sided nature of man are coordinated and synchronized, reactions and pathological symptoms are the result of that downrush. This does not mean that the invoker of Zeus is necessarily a worshipper of Priapus, but it does mean that no man can sublimate a dissociation. When the channel is free from obstructions, the downrushing force can swing round the nadir and become an uprushing force which can be directed to any sphere or turned into any channel that is desired. But, like it or not, it will be a downrushing force before it is an uprushing one, and unless our feet are firmly planted on elemental earth we shall be like bursting wineskins. 26. Every practical occultist knows that Freud has spoken the truth, even though it is not the whole truth, but they are afraid to say so for fear of being accused of phallic worship and orgiastic practices. These things have their place, though it is not in the temple of the Holy Spirit, and to deny them their place is a folly for which the Victorian age paid dearly in a rich harvest of psychopathology. 27. Whenever we are working dynamically upon any plane we are operating the right-hand pillar of the tree and derive our primary energy from the Yod force of Chakma. In this connection we must refer to the fact that the microcosmic correspondence of Chakma is given as the left side of the face. The macrocosmic and microcosmic correspondences play an important part in the practical workings. The macrocosm, or great man, is, of course, the universe itself, and the microcosm is the individual man. It is said that man is the only being that has a fourfold nature exactly corresponding in its levels to the cosmos. The angels lack the lower planes, and the animals lack the higher planes. 28. The references to the microcosm should not, of course, be taken crudely as representing the parts of the physical body. The references are to the aura and the functions of the magnetic currents in the aura, and it must always be borne in mind, as the Swami Vivekananda points out, that what is on the right in the male is on the left in the female. In addition to this, it must be remembered that what is positive on the physical plane is negative on the astral plane. It is positive again on the mental plane and negative on the spiritual plane, as is indicated in the twining black and white serpents of the caduceus of Mercury. If this caduceus be placed upon the tree when the tree is marked off to represent the four worlds of the Kabbalists, a glyph is formed which reveals the workings of the law of polarity in relation to the planes. This is a very important glyph, and yields a great deal to meditation. 29. From this we learn that when the soul is in a female incarnation it will function negatively in Asaya and Bria, but positively in Yetzirah and Atziluth. In other words, a woman is physically and mentally negative, but psychically and spiritually positive, and the reverse holds good for a man. In initiates, however, there is a considerable degree of compensation, for each learns the technique of both positive and negative psychic methods. The divine spark, which is the nucleus of every living soul, is, of course, bisexual, containing the roots of both aspects, as does Kether, to which it corresponds. In the more highly evolved souls the compensating aspect is developed in some degree at least. The purely female woman and the purely male man prove to be oversexed as judged by civilized standards, and can only find an appropriate place in primitive societies, where fertility is the primary demand that society makes upon its women. And hunting and fighting are the constant occupation of the men. 30. This does not mean, however, that the physical functions of the sexes are perverted in the initiate, or that the configuration of the body is modified. Esoteric science teaches that the physical form and racial type which the soul assumes in each incarnation are determined by destiny, or karma, and that the life has to be worked out and lived accordingly. It is inadvisable for us to play tricks with our type, racial or physical, and we should always accept it as the basis of our operations, and choose our methods accordingly. There are certain operations and certain offices in the lodge for which a male vehicle is more suitable than a female, and when practical work is on hand the officers in a ceremony are selected on type. But when the routine training of an initiate is in progress it is the custom to let everyone take turns at the different offices in order that they may learn to handle the different types of force and so become equilibrated. 31. Benjamin Kidd, in his very stimulating book, The Science of Power, points out that the highest type of human being approximates to the infantile. We observe the enormous relative size of the head as compared with the body weight in the infant, and that the secondary sexual characteristics are not present. We find the same tendency appearing in a modified form in the civilized adult. The highest type of man is not a hirsute gorilla, nor is the highest type of woman an exaggerated mammal. The tendency of evolution in civilization is to an approximation of type between the sexes so far as the secondary sexual characteristics are concerned. What percentage of city-dwelling males could grow a really patriarchal beard? The primary sexual character, however, must be maintained unimpaired or the race speedily dies out, and we have no reason to believe that this is the case even among our most epicene moderns, who fill the divorce courts with abundant evidence of their overflowing philoprogenitiveness. 32. These things we can understand in the light that is thrown on them when they are placed upon the tree. The two pillars, the positive under Chakma and the negative under Bina, correspond respectively to the Ida and Pingala of the yoga systems. These two magnetic currents, running in the aura parallel to the spine, are called the sun and moon currents. In a male incarnation we work predominantly with the sun current, the fertilizer. In a female incarnation we work predominantly with the moon forces. If we desire to work with the opposite type of force to that with which we are naturally endowed, we have to do so by using our natural mode as the basis of operations and, as it were, canonicking off the cushion. The male who wants to use the moon forces employs devices that enable him to get his natural sun force reflected, and the female who wants to use the sun forces employs a device whereby she is enabled to focus them upon herself and reflect them. On the physical plane the sexes mate, and the man begets a child upon the woman, thus availing himself of her moon powers. The woman, on the other hand, desiring creation and unable to compass it single-handed, entices the male through his desires till he bestows upon her his sun force and she is impregnated. 33. In magical workings the man or woman who desires to work with the opposite type of force to that of their physical vehicle, and it is part of the routine of occult training that they should do so, shifts the level of consciousness onto a plane on which they find themselves of the requisite polarity, and works thereon. The priest of Osiris sometimes employs the elemental spirits to supplement his polarity, and the priestess of Isis invokes angelic influences. 34. Because manifestation takes place through the pairs of opposites, the principle of polarity is implicit not only in the macrocosm but also in the microcosm. By understanding it, and knowing how to avail ourselves of the potentialities it affords, we can raise our natural powers far above their normal. We can use our environment as a thrust block. We can look for the potent Chakma force in books, in our racial tradition, in our religion, in our friends and associates. From all these we can receive the stimulus that fecundates us and makes us creative mentally, emotionally, and dynamically. We make our environment play Chakma to our Bina. Equally, we can play Chakma to its Bina. Upon the subtle planes polarity is not fixed, but is relative. That which is more forceful than ourselves is positive towards us, and renders us negative towards itself. That which is less forceful than we are in any given aspect is negative towards us, and we can assume the positive role towards it. This fluidic, ever-fluctuating subtle polarity is one of the most important points in the practical workings. If we understand it and avail ourselves of it, we can do some very remarkable things and put our lives and our relations with our environment on an altogether different basis. 35. We must learn to know when we can function as Chakma and beget deeds upon the world, and when we had best function as Bina, and make our environment fertilize us so that we become productive. We must never forget that self-fertilization involves sterility in a few generations, and that we must ever and again be fertilized by the medium in which we are working. There must be an interplay of polarity between us and whatever we have set out to do, and we must always be on the alert to find polarizing influences, whether in tradition, or in books, or in fellow workers in the same field. Or even in the very opposition and antagonism of enemies. For there is just as much polarizing force in a hearty hatred as there is in love, if we know how to use it. We must have stimulus if we are to create anything, even a useful life well lived. Chakma is the cosmic stimulus. Whatever stimulates is assigned to Chakma in the classification of the tree. Sedatives are assigned to Bina. We shall obtain further insight into this principle of cosmic polarity as we study Bina, the third Saphira, for it is hardly possible to understand the implications of Chakma without reference to its polarizing opposite, with which it always functions. We will, therefore, carry no further our study of polarity at the present time, but conclude our examination of Chakma by reference to the cards attributed to it in the tarot pack. And resume our research into this most significant subject when Bina has afforded us further data. 36. As was noted in the chapter upon Kether, the 4 suits of the tarot pack are assigned to the 4 elements, and we saw that the 4 aces represented the roots of the powers of these elements. The 4 twos are assigned to Chakma, and represent the polarized functioning of these elements in harmonized balance. Therefore a 2 is always a card of harmony. 37. The 2 of Wands, which is assigned to the element of fire, is called the Lord of Dominion. The wand is essentially a male phallic symbol, and is attributed to Chakma, so we may take this card as meaning polarization, the positive that has found its mate in the negative, and is in equilibrium. There is no antagonism or resistance to the Lord of Dominion, but a contented land accepts his rule. Bina, fulfilled, accepts her mate. 38. The 2 of Cups, water, is called the Lord of Love, and here again we have the concept of harmonious polarization. 39. The 2 of Swords, air, is called the Lord of Peace restored, indicating that the disruptive force of swords is in temporary equilibrium. 40. The 2 of Pentacles, earth, is called the Lord of harmonious change. Here, as in swords, we see a modification of the essential nature of the elemental force by its polarizing opposite, thus inducing equilibrium. The disruptive force of swords is restored to peace, and the inertia and resistance of earth becomes, when polarized by the influence of Chakma, a balanced rhythm. 41. These 4 cards indicate the Chakma force in polarity, that is to say the essential balance of power as it manifests in the 4 worlds of the Kabbalists. When they appear in a divination they indicate power in equilibrium. They do not indicate a dynamic force, as might be expected where Chakma is concerned, because Chakma, being one of the supernals, its force is positive upon the subtle planes, and consequently negative upon the planes of form. The negative aspect of a dynamic force is represented by equilibrium, polarity. The negative aspect of a negative potency is represented by destruction, as is shown in the glyph of Kali, the terrible wife of Shiva, girdled with skulls and dancing upon the body of her husband. 42. This concept gives us a key to another of the many problems of the tree, the relative polarity of the Sephiroth. As has previously been explained, each Sephira is negative in its relation with those above it, from which it receives the influx of the emanations, and positive in relation to those beneath it, which proceed from it. And to which it therefore acts as emanator. Certain of the paired Sephiroth are, however, more definitely positive or more definitely negative in their nature. For instance, Chakma is a positive, and Bina is a positive-negative. Chisid is a negative-positive, and Gabura a negative-negative. Netzach, Venus, and Hod, Mercury, are said to be hermaphroditic. Yesod, Luna, is a positive-negative, and Makath, Earth, is a negative-negative. Neither Kether nor Tifereth are predominantly male or female. In Kether the pairs of opposites are latent and have not yet declared themselves, in Tifereth they are in perfect equilibrium. 43. There are two ways in which transmutation can be effected on the tree, and these are indicated by two of the glyphs which are superimposed upon the Sephiroth. One of these is the glyph of the three pillars, and the other is the glyph of the lightning flash. The pillars have been already described. The lightning flash simply indicates the order of emanation of the Sephiroth, zigzagging from Chakma to Bina and from Bina to Chisid, backwards and forwards across the tree. If transmutation takes place according to the lightning flash, the force changes its type; if according to the pillars, it remains of the same type, but on a higher or lower R as the case may be. 44. This sounds very complex and abstract, but examples will soon serve to show it to be simple and practical when understood. Take the problem of the sublimation of sex force, which besets the psychotherapists, concerning which they talk so glibly and say so little. In Makath, which in the microcosm is the physical body, sex force is in terms of ovum and spermatozoon. In Yesod, which is the etheric double, it is in terms of magnetic force, concerning which nothing is known to orthodox psychology, but concerning which we shall have a good deal to say under the heading of the appropriate Sephira. Hod and Netzach are on the astral plane, and in Hod we find that the sex force is expressed in visual images, and in Netzach in another and altogether subtler type of magnetism popularly referred to as it. In Tifereth, the Christ center, the force becomes spiritual inspiration, illumination, the influx from the higher consciousness. If it is positive in type, it becomes the Dionysiac inspiration, a divine inebriation. And if it is negative, it becomes the impersonal, all-harmonizing Christ love. 45. When the transmutation is worked upon the pillars we are impressed by the truth of the ironical French phrase, plus ca change, plus cs la même chose. Chakma, pure dynamism, pure stimulus without formed expression, in Chisid becomes the upbuilding, organizing aspect of evolution, anabolism, as distinguished from the catabolism of Gabura. In Chisid the Chakma force becomes that peculiarly subtle form of magnetism which gives power of leadership and is the root of greatness. Equally, on the left-hand pillar, the force restraining Bina becomes the form-destroying Gabura, and again the maker of magical images, Mercury Hermes-Thoth. 46. From time to time the symbols of occult science have leaked out into popular knowledge, but the uninitiated have not understood the method of arranging these symbols in their pattern as the tree, nor of applying to them the alchemical principles of transmutation and distillation wherein lie the real secrets of their use. Bina, the third Sephira. Title, Bina, Understanding. Hebrew, Beth, Yod, Nun, He. Virtue, Silence. Magical image, a mature woman. A matron. Vice, avarice. Situation on the tree, at the head of the pillar of severity in the supernal triangle. Yetziratic text, the third intelligence is called the sanctifying intelligence, the foundation of primordial wisdom, it is also called the creator of faith, and its roots are in Amen. It is the parent of faith, whence faith emanates. Titles given to Bina, Alma, the dark sterile mother. Ima, the bright fertile mother. Corsia, the throne. Merib, the great sea. God name, Jehovah Elohim. Archangel, Safkiel. Order of angels, Eralim, thrones. Mundane chakra, Shabbathai, Saturn. Spiritual experience, vision of sorrow. Correspondence in microcosm, the right side of the face. Symbols, the yoni. The ties. The vesica Pisces. The cup or chalice. The outer robe of concealment. Tarot cards, the 4 threes. 3 of wands, established strength. 3 of cups, abundance. 3 of swords, sorrow. 3 of pentacles, material works. Color in Atziluth, crimson. Berach, black. Yetzirah, dark brown. Asaya, gray-flecked pink. 1. Bina is the third member of the supernal triangle, and the task of its elucidation will be both extended and simplified because we can study it in the light of Chakma, which balances it on the opposing pillar of the tree. It is never possible to understand a Sapphira if we consider it apart from its position on the tree, because this position indicates its cosmic relationships. We see it in perspective, as it were, and can deduce whence it comes and whither it goes. What influences have gone to its making, and what it contributes to the scheme of things entire. 2. Bina represents the female potency of the universe, even as Chakma represents the male. As already noted, they are positive and negative. Force and form. Each heads its pillar, Chakma at the head of the pillar of mercy, and Bina at the head of the pillar of severity. It may be thought that this is an unnatural distribution. That the supernal mother should preside over the mercies, and the male force of the universe over the severities. But we must not sentimentalize these things. We are dealing with cosmic principles, not personalities. And even the symbols under which they are presented give us insight if we have eyes to see. Freud would not have quarreled with the attribution of Bina to the head of the pillar of severity, for he has a great deal to say about the image of the terrible mother. 3. Kether, Ihi, I am, is pure being, all potential but non-active. When a flowing forth of activity takes place from it, we call that activity Chakma. It is this descending stream of pure activity which is the dynamic force of the universe, and all dynamic force belongs to this category. 4. It must be remembered that the Sephiroth are states, not places. Wherever there is a state of pure, unconditioned being, without parts or activities, it is referred to Kether. Thus into these 10 pigeonholes of our metaphysical card index system we can sort our ideas of the whole of the manifested universe without the necessity of removing any object from its place in nature as it appears to our understanding. In other words, wherever we see pure energy functioning, we know that the underlying force is that of Chakma. This enables us to see the intrinsic identity in type of all manner of phenomena which at first sight appear entirely unrelated. For we learn by the Kabbalistic method to refer them according to their type to the different Sephiroth, thus enabling ourselves to link them up with all manner of cognate ideas according to the system of correspondences explained on a previous page. This is the method of the subconscious mind, which it pursues automatically. The occultist trains his conscious mind in the use of the same method. Incidentally, we may note that whenever individuals are working directly off the subconscious, as occurs in artistic genius, in lunacy, and in dream or trance, this method is used. 5. It may seem strange to the reader that this digression concerning Chakma should be included under the heading of Bina, but it is only in the light of its polarity with Chakma that Bina can be understood. And equally, we shall have a great deal more to add to our explanation of Chakma now that we have got Bina to compare it with. Each of the pairs of opposites throws light on the other and is incomprehensible alone. 6. But to return to Bina, the Kabbalists state that it is emanated by Chakma. Let us translate this statement into other terms. It is an occult maxim, which is, I believe, confirmed by the researches of Einstein, though I have not the knowledge necessary to correlate his findings with the esoteric doctrines, that force never moves in a straight line. but always curve vast as the universe, and therefore eventually returns whence it issued forth, but upon a higher arc, for the universe has progressed since it started. It follows, then, that force proceeding thus, dividing and redividing and moving at tangential angles, will eventually arrive at a state of interlocking stresses and some manner of stability. A stability which tends to be overset in course of time as fresh forces are emanated from it into manifestation and introduce new factors with which adjustment has to be made. 7. It is this state of stability, which is arrived at by the interacting forces when they act and react and come to a standstill, which is the basis of form, as is exemplified in the atom. Which is nothing more nor less than a constellation of electrons, each of which is a vortex, or whirlpool. The stability thus achieved, which, be it noted, is a condition and not a thing in itself, is what Kabbalists call Bina, the third Sephira. Wherever there is a state of interacting stresses which have achieved stability, the Kabbalists refer the condition to Bina. For instance, the atom, being for all practical purposes the stable unit of the physical plane, is a manifestation of the Bina type of force. All social organizations on which the dead hand of unprogressiveness weighs heavily, such as the Chinese civilization before the revolution, or our older universities, are said to be under the influence of Bina. To Bina are attributed the Greek god Kronos, who is none other than Father Time, and the Roman god Saturn. It will be observed the importance attached to time, in other words to age, in these Bina institutions. Only gray hairs are venerable. Ability alone carries little weight. That is to say, only those who are congenial to Kronos can succeed in such an environment. 8. Bina, the Great Mother, sometimes also called Mara, the Great Sea, is, of course, the mother of all living. She is the archetypal womb through which life comes into manifestation. Whatsoever provides a form to serve life as a vehicle is of her. It must be remembered, however, that life confined in a form, although it is enabled thereby to organize and so evolve, is much less free than it was when it was unlimited, though also unorganized, on its own plane. Involvement in a form is therefore the beginning of the death of life. It is a straightening and a limiting, a binding and a constricting. Form checks life, thwarts it, and yet enables it to organize. Seen from the point of view of free-moving force, incarceration in a form is extinction. Form disciplines force with a merciless severity. 9. The disembodied spirit is immortal, there is nothing of it that can grow old or die. But the embodied spirit sees death on the horizon as soon as its day dawns. We can see then how terrible must the Great Mother appear as she binds free-moving force into the discipline of form. She is death to the dynamic activity of Chakma. The Chakma force dies as it issues into Bina. Form is the discipline of force, therefore is Bina the head of the pillar of severity. 10. We may conceive that the first cosmic night set in, the first pralaya, or sinking of manifestation to rest, when the supernal triangle found stability and equilibrium of force with the emanation and organization of Bina. All was dynamic before. All was forth-rushing and expansion, but with the coming into manifestation of the Bina aspect there was an interlocking and stabilizing, and the old dynamic free flow was no more. 11. That such an interlocking and consequent stabilization was inevitable in a universe whose lines of force ever move in curves is a foregone conclusion. And we can see, if we observe how the Bina state was the inevitable outcome of the Chakma state in a curvilinear universe, that time must move through epochs in which either Bina or Chakma predominate. Before the lines of force had completed their circuit of the manifested universe and begun to return upon themselves and interlace, all was Chakma, and dynamism was unrestricted. After Bina and Chakma, as the first pairs of opposites, had found equilibrium, all was Bina, and stability was immovable. But Kether, the great emanator, continues to make manifest the great unmanifest. Force flows in upon the universe, and the sum of force is increased. This inflowing force oversets the equilibrium that is arrived at when Chakma and Bina have acted, reacted, and come to a stop. Action and reaction commence again, and the Chakma phase, a phase in which dynamic force predominates, supervenes upon the static condition which is Bina, and the cycle proceeds once more. Equilibrium between the pairs of opposites being arrived at in a more complex form, on a higher arc. As it is called from the evolutionary point of view, only to be overset again as the ever-emanating Kether weighs down the balance in favor of the kinetic principle as opposed to the static principle. 12. It will thus be seen that if Kether, the source of all being, is conceived of as the highest good, as it inevitably must be, and the nature of Kether is kinetic and its influence is forever inclined towards Chakma, it inevitably follows that Bina, the opposite of Chakma, the perpetual opposer of the dynamic impulses, will be regarded as the enemy of God, the evil one. Saturn-Satan is an easy transition, and so is Time-Death-Devil. Implicit in the ascetic religions such as Christianity and Buddhism is the idea that woman is the root of all evil, because she is the influence which holds men to a life of form by their desires. Matter is regarded by them as the antinomy of spirit in an eternal, unresolved duality. Christianity is ready enough to recognize the heretical nature of this belief when it is presented to it in the form of antinomianism. But it does not realize that its own teaching and practice are equally antinomian when it regards matter as the enemy of spirit, and as such to be abrogated and overcome. This unhappy belief has caused as much human suffering in Christian countries as war and pestilence. 13. The Kabbalah teaches a wiser doctrine. To it, all the Sephiroth are holy, mocketh equally with Kether, and Geburah the destroyer with Chesed the preserver. It recognizes that rhythm is the basis of life, not a steady forward progress. If we understood this better, how much suffering we should save ourselves, for we should watch the Chakma and Bina phases succeeding each other, both in our own lives and the lives of nations. And would realize the deep significance of Shakespeare's words when he says, "There is a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads on to fortune." 14. Bina is the primordial root of matter, but the full development of matter is not found till we arrive at Malkuth, the material universe. We shall see repeatedly in the course of our studies that the three supernals have their specialized expressions on a lower arc in one or another of the 6 Sephiroth which form microprosopos. It is repeatedly said of these that they have their roots in or are reflections of the higher triad, and these hints have a deep significance. Bina links with Malkuth as the root with the fruit. This is indicated in the Yetziratic text of Malkuth, in which it says, "She sitteth upon the throne of Bina." It is for this reason that a hard and fast attribution of the gods of other pantheons to the different Sephiroth is impracticable. Aspects of Isis are to be found in Bina, Netzach, Yesod, and Malkuth. Aspects of Osiris are to be found in Chakma, Chesed, and Tifereth. This comes out clearly in Greek mythology, wherein the different gods and goddesses are given descriptive titles. For instance, Diana, the moon goddess, the virgin huntress, was worshipped at Ephesus as the many-breasted. Venus, the goddess of female beauty and of love, had a temple where she was worshipped as the bearded Venus. These things teach us some important truths. They teach us to look for the principle behind the multiform manifestation, and to realize that it assumes different forms on different levels. Life is not quite so simple as the uninformed would like to believe. 15. The meaning of the Hebrew names of the second and third Sephiroth are wisdom and understanding, and these are curiously balanced one against the other as if the distinction were of primary importance. Wisdom suggests to our minds the idea of accumulated knowledge, of the infinite series of images in the memory. But understanding conveys to us the idea of a penetration into their significance, a power to perceive their essence and interrelation, which is not necessarily implicit in wisdom, taken as intellectual knowledge. Thus we get a concept of an extended series, a chain of associated ideas, in relation to Chakma, which at once correlates with the Chakma symbol of a straight line. But in regard to understanding we get the idea of synthesis, of the perception of significances which comes when ideas are related one to another, and superimposed, metaphorically speaking, one upon another in evolutionary series from the dense to the subtle. Thus does the idea of the binding together Bina principle come once again to our minds. 16. These are subtle ways of mind working, and may appear foolishness to those unaccustomed to the initiate's method of using his mind. But the psychoanalyst understands them and appreciates them at their true significance, and so likewise does the poet when he constructs his cloud-capped towers of imagery. 17. The Yetziratic text stresses the idea of faith, the faith that rests on understanding, whose parent is Bina. This is the only place where faith may rightly rest. A cynic defined faith as the power of believing what you know isn't true. And this appears to be a fairly accurate definition for the manifestations of faith as they appear in many uninstructed minds, the fruit of the discipline of sex unenlightened by mystical consciousness. But in the light of that consciousness we may define faith as the conscious result of superconscious experience which has not been translated into terms of brain consciousness, and of which, therefore, the normal personality is not directly aware. Though it nevertheless feels, possibly with great intensity, the effects, and its emotional reactions are fundamentally and permanently modified thereby. 18. In the light of this definition we can see how the roots of faith may indeed rest in Bina, understanding, the synthetic principle of consciousness. For there is a form aspect to consciousness as well as to substance, and that aspect we shall consider in detail when we come to the study of Had, the basal Sephira of Bina's pillar of severity. Thus we see yet again how the Sephiroth link up among themselves, and the illumination that comes from observing their interrelationships. 19. The statement that the roots of Bina are in Amen refers to Kether, for one of the titles of Kether is Amen. This clearly declares that although Chokmah emanates Bina, we must not pause there when seeking origins, but move back to the fount of all as it rises from the unmanifest behind the veils of negative existence. This concept is brought out very clearly by the Yetziratic text of Chesed, wherein it says, speaking of spiritual forces, they emanate one from another by virtue of the primordial emanation, the highest crown, Kether. 20. We must not be misled or confused in this respect by the fact that the Yetziratic text of Gebura declares that Bina, understanding, emanates from the primordial depths of Chokmah, wisdom. Bina is in Kether as well as Chokmah, but after another manner. In pure being, formless and partless though it is, are the possibilities of both force and form. For where there is a positive pole, there is necessarily the correlative aspect of a negative pole. Kether is forever in a state of becoming. In fact, I have been told by a Jewish Kabbalist that the real translation of Ehi, the god name of Kether, is, I will be, not I am. This constant becoming cannot remain static, it must overflow into activity. And that activity cannot forever remain uncorrelated within itself, it must organize, some manner of adjustment of interlocking stresses must be arrived at, thus we have the potentiality of both Chokmah and Bina implicit in Kether. For be it said yet again that the holy Sephiroth are not things, but states, and that all manifested things exist in one or another of these states, and contain an admixture of these factors in their makeup. So that the whole of the manifested universe can be sorted out into its appropriate pigeonholes in our minds when the glyph of the tree is established there. Indeed, when once that glyph is clearly formulated and well established, the mind uses it automatically, and the complex phenomena of objective existence sort themselves out in our understanding. It is for this reason that the student of occultism who is working in an initiatory school is made to learn the principal correspondences of the 10 holy Sephiroth off by heart, instead of being allowed to depend upon tables of reference. It has often been objected that this is an intolerable waste of time and energy, and that reference to the tables of correspondences, such as Crowley's 777, is quite as good. But experience proves that this is not the case, and that the esotericist who sets himself to this discipline and rehearses them daily, as the Catholic tells his rosary, is amply repaid by the subsequent illumination he receives as his mind automatically sorts out the innumerable changes and chances of mundane life onto the tree, thus revealing their spiritual significance. It must always be borne in mind that the use of the tree of life is not merely an intellectual exercise. It is a creative art in the literal meaning of the words, and faculties have to be developed in the mind even as manual skill is acquired by sculptor or musician. 21. The Yetziratic text specifically refers to Bina as the sanctifying intelligence. Sanctification conveys the idea of that which is holy and set apart. The Virgin Mary is held to be intimately associated with Bina, the Great Mother. And from this attribution the mind is led on to the idea of that which brings forth the all but retains its virginity. In other words, whose creativeness does not involve it in the life of its creation, but which remains apart and behind as the basis of manifestation, the root substance whence matter arises. For although matter is held to have its roots in Bina, yet matter as we know it is of a very different order of being to the supernal Sapphira in which its essence lies. Bina, the primordial formative influence, the parent of all form, is behind and beyond manifesting substance, in other words, is ever virgin. It is this formative influence underlying all form building, this tendency for curving lines of force to correlate and achieve stability, which is Bina. 22. These two basal Sephiroth of the supernal triad are especially referred to as the Father and Mother, Abba and Amma, and their magical images are those of the bearded male and the matron, thus representing not the sex attraction of Netzach and Yesod, who are represented as maiden and youth, but the mature beings who have mated and reproduced. We must always distinguish between magnetic sex attraction and reproduction. They are by no means one and the same thing, oft are they even different levels or aspects of the same thing. Herein is an important occult truth which we will consider in detail in due course. 23. Chakma and Bina, then, represent essential maleness and femaleness in their creative aspects. They are not phallic images as such, but in them is the root of all life force. We shall never understand the deeper aspects of esotericism unless we realize what phallicism really means. It most emphatically does not mean the orgies in the temples of Aphrodite that disgraced the decadence of the pagan faiths of the ancients and brought about their downfall. It means that everything rests upon the principle of the stimulation of the inert yet all potential by the dynamic principle which derives its energy direct from the source of all energy. In this concept lie tremendous keys of knowledge. It is one of the most important points in the mysteries. It is obvious that sex represents one aspect of this factor. It is equally obvious that there are many other applications of it which are not sexual. We must not allow any preconceived concept of what constitutes sex, or a conventional attitude towards this great and vital subject, to frighten us away from the great principle of the stimulation or fecundation of the inert all-potential by the active principle. Whosoever is thus inhibited is unfit for the mysteries, over whose portal was written the words, Know thyself. 24. Such knowledge does not lead to impurity, for impurity implies a loss of control that permits forces to override the bounds that nature has set them. Whoso has not control of his own instincts and passions is no more fitted for the mysteries than he who inhibits and dissociates them. Let it be clearly realized, however, that the mysteries do not teach asceticism or celibacy as a requirement of achievement, because they do not regard spirit and matter as an irreconcilable pair of antinomies, but rather as different levels of the same thing. Purity does not consist in emasculating, but in keeping the different forces to their proper levels and in their proper places, and not allowing one to invade another. It teaches that frigidity and impotence are just as much imperfections, and therefore pathologies of sex, as is uncontrolled lust that destroys its object and debases itself. 25. Every relationship of manifested existence involves the Bina and Chakma principles, and because sex is such a perfect representation of these it was used as such by the ancients, who were not troubled by our timidities on the subject, and took their metaphors from the subject of reproduction as freely as we take ours from the Bible. For to them reproduction was a sacred process, and they referred to it, not with ribaldry, but with reverence. If we want to understand them, we must approach their teaching on the subject of the life source and life force in the same spirit in which they approached it, and no one whose eyes are not blinded by prejudice, or who does not stand in the shadow thrown by his own unsolved problems, can fail to realize that our present-day attitude towards life would be both saner and sweeter for a leavening of pagan common sense and discernment. 26. The principles of maleness and femaleness as manifested in Chakma and Bina represent more than mere positivity and negativity, activity and passivity. Chakma, the all-begetter, is a vehicle of primal force, the immediate manifestation of Kether. It is, in fact, Kether in action, for the different Sephiroth do not represent different things, but different functions of the same thing. I.e., pure force welling up into manifestation from the great unmanifest which is behind the negative veils of existence. Chakma is pure force, even as the expansion of petrol as it explodes in the combustion chamber of an engine is pure force. But just as this expansive force would expand and be lost if there were no engine to transmit its power, so the undirected energy of Chakma would radiate into space and be lost if there were nothing to receive its impulse and utilize it. Chakma explodes like petrol, Bina is the combustion chamber, Gedula and Gebura are the back and forth strokes of the piston. 27. Now the expansive force given off by petrol is pure energy, but it will not drive a car. The constrictive organization of Bina is potentially capable of driving a car, but it cannot do so unless set in motion by the expansion of the stored-up energy of petrol vapor. Bina is all potential, but inert. Chakma is pure energy, limitless and tireless, but incapable of doing anything except radiate off into space if left to its own devices. But when Chakma acts upon Bina, its energy is gathered up and set to work. When Bina receives the impulse of Chakma, all her latent capacities are energized. Briefly, Chakma supplies the energy, and Bina supplies the machine. 28. Consider now the maleness and femaleness of this pair of supernal opposites as reflected in the act of generation. The spermatozoa of the male are incapable of more than the briefest life, they are the simplest possible units of energy. Once that energy is expended, they dissolve. But the reproductive mechanism of the female, the womb that bears and the breasts that feed, are capable of bringing this handed-on life to independent life of its own. And yet all this elaborate machinery must lie inert till the stimulus of the Chakma force sets it in action. The female reproductive unit is all potential, but inert, the male reproductive unit is all potent, but incapable of bringing to birth. 29. Most people think that because maleness and femaleness as they know them on the physical plane are fixed principles determined by structure, that the potent and the potential are rigidly bound to their respective mechanisms. Now this is an error. There is a continual alternation of polarity on every plane except the physical. And indeed, among primitive types of animal life there is even an alternation of polarity on the physical plane. Among higher types, and especially the vertebrates, polarity is fixed by the accident of birth, save in hermaphroditic anomalies, which can't be regarded as other than pathological, and in which only one sex is ever functionally active. Whatever the apparent development of the other aspect may be. It is a knowledge of this continual interplay of polarity which is one of the most important secrets of the mysteries. It is in no sense homosexuality, which is a perverted and pathological expression of this fact that breaks out as a disorder of sexual feeling when the law of alternating polarity is not rightly understood. 30. Briefly, although his actual mode of reproduction on the physical plane is determined for every individual by the configuration of his body, his spiritual reactions are not so fixed, for the soul is bisexual. In other words, in every relation of life we are sometimes positive and sometimes negative, according to whether circumstances are stronger than we are, or we are stronger than circumstances. This is clearly indicated in the proverb, that the grey mare is sometimes the better horse. It also comes out clearly in the fact that Netzach, Venus Aphrodite, is the basal Sapphira of Chakma's pillar. We thus get the female nature showing a different polarity on different levels, for in Netzach she is as positive and dynamic as she is static in Bina. 31. All this is not only bewildering intellectually, but also confusing morally, and even at the risk of being accused of fostering all manner of abnormalities, I must try to make the matter clear, for its practical implications are so far-reaching. 32. It has been said by the rabbis that each Sapphira is negative in relation to the one above it by which it is emanated, and positive in relation to the one below it which it emanates. This gives us the key. We are negative in our relationships with that which is of a higher potential than we are, and we are positive in our relationships with that which has a lower potential. This is a relationship which is in a perpetual state of flux, and which varies at every separate point at which we make our innumerable contacts with our environment. 33. For the most part, the relationship between a man and a woman is not entirely satisfactory to either party, and they have either to put up with incomplete satisfaction in their relationship under the compulsion of religious or economic pressure, or supplement elsewhere their incompleteness, with as a rule a recurrence of the previous conditions when once the novelty has worn off. It is to be observed that under such circumstances it is only in novelty that sexual satisfaction at its highest is to be found, and novelty is a thing which requires constantly to be renewed, with disastrous results to sexual economics. 34. The trouble is, that while the male gives the physical stimulus which leads to reproduction, he does not realize that on the inner planes he is by virtue of the law of reversed polarity, negative, and is dependent for his emotional completeness upon the stimulation given by the female. He is dependent upon her for emotional fertilization, as is clearly shown in the case of any highly creative mind, such as Wagner or Shelley. 35. Marriage is not a matter of two halves, but of four quarters, uniting in balanced harmony of reciprocal fecundation. Bina and Chakma are balanced by Hod and Netzach. There are goddesses as well as gods for man to worship. Boaz and Jachin are both pillars of the temple, and only when united do they produce stability. A goddess-less religion is halfway to atheism. In the word Elohim we find the true key. Elohim is translated God in both authorized and revised versions of the Holy Scriptures. It really ought to be translated God and Goddess, for it is a feminine noun with a masculine plural termination affixed. This is an incontrovertible fact, in its linguistic aspect at any rate, and it is to be presumed that the various authors of the books of the Bible knew what they meant, and did not use this peculiar and unique form without good reason. And the spirit of the male and female conjoined principles moved upon the surface of the formless, and manifestation took place. If we want equilibrium instead of our present condition of unequal stresses, we must worship the Elohim, not Jehovah. 36. The worship of Jehovah instead of the Elohim is a potent influence in preventing us from rising on the planes, that is to say from obtaining supernormal consciousness as part of our normal equipment. For we must be prepared to shift our polarity as we shift level, for what is positive on the physical plane becomes negative on the astral, and vice versa. Also, as practical occult work always involves the use of more than one plane, either simultaneously, as in invocation and evocation, or in succession, as when we correlate the levels of consciousness after psychic work. The negative factor must always have its place in our work, both subjectively and objectively. 37. This again opens up new aspects of the subject. How many people realize that their own souls are literally bisexual within themselves, and that the different levels of consciousness act as male and female towards each other? 38. Freud declared that the sex life determines the type of the whole life. Probably, fundamentally, the life as a whole determines the type of the sex life, but for practical purposes his manner of putting it is true. For while it is not possible to straighten out a tangled sexual life by operating upon life as a whole, for instance, no amount of wealth or fame is any adequate compensation if this fundamental instinct be thwarted, it is quite possible to straighten out the whole life pattern by disentangling the sex life. This is a matter of practical experience, and does not need to be reasoned from a priori grounds. No doubt it is for this reason, learned by practical experience of the workings of the human consciousness, that the ancients made phallicism such an important part of their rites. Actually, it is a very important factor in the ceremonial aspect of the worship of moderns also, but recognition of the significance of the symbols employed traditionally has been repressed from consciousness. 39. Freudian psychology supplies the key to phallicism and opens a door that leads into the adytum of the mysteries. There is no getting away from this fact in practical occultism, unpalatable as it may be to many. And it explains why so many magical enterprises are sterile. 40. These matters are highly recondite secrets of the mysteries, of which we moderns have lost the keys. But the experience of the new psychology, and its allied art of psychiatry, has abundantly proved the soundness of the basis on which the ancients built when they made adoration of the creative principle and of fertility an important part of their religious life. It is a matter of well-established experience that the person who has dissociated his or her sexual feelings from consciousness can never get to grips with life on any level. This fact is the basis of modern psychotherapy. In occult work, the inhibited, repressed person tends to unbalanced forms of psychism and mediumship, and is totally useless for magical work in which power has to be directed and handled by the will. This does not mean that either total repression or total expression is necessary for magical working, but it does most emphatically mean that the person who is cut off from his instincts, which are his roots in Mother Earth, and in whose consciousness in consequence there is a gap, cannot be an open channel through which power can be brought down the planes into manifestation on the physical level. 41. I shall no doubt be abused and misrepresented for my frankness in these matters. But if no one will come forward and bear the odium of speaking the truth, how is the wayfaring man to find his way in the mysteries? Are we to maintain a Victorian attitude in the lodge which has everywhere been abandoned outside it? Someone must break these false gods made in the image of Mrs. Grundy. I am inclined to think, however, that any loss I may sustain on this account will be small, for it would not be possible to train or to cooperate with the kind of person who is thrown into a panic by plain speaking. Do not let it be thought that I am inviting anyone to participate with me in phallic orgies, as it will probably be said that I am doing. I am merely pointing out that the person who cannot see the significance of phallic worship from the psychological point of view has not got enough brains to be of very much use in the mysteries. 42. Having given considerable space to the elucidation of the Bina principle functioning in polarity with Chakma, for not otherwise can it be understood, for it is essentially a principle of polarity. We can now consider the significance of the symbolism assigned to the third Sapphira. This falls into two divisions, the Great Mother aspect and the Saturn aspect, for both these attributions are given to Bina. She is the mighty mother of all living, and she is also the death principle. For the giver of life in form is also the giver of death, for form must die when its use is outworn. Upon the planes of form, death and birth are the two sides of the same coin. 43. The mother aspect of Bina finds expression in the title of Mara, the sea, which is given her. It is a curious fact that Venus Aphrodite is represented as being born of the sea foam, and the Virgin Mary is called by Catholics Stella Maris, star of the sea. The word Mara, which is the root of Mary, also means bitter, and the spiritual experience attributed to Bina is the vision of sorrow. A vision which calls to mind the picture of the Virgin weeping at the foot of the cross, her heart pierced by 7 swords. We also recall the teaching of the Buddha that life is sorrow. The idea of subjection to sorrow and death is implicit in the idea of the descent of life to the planes of form. 44. The Yetziratic text of Makath, already referred to, speaks of the throne of Bina. One of the titles given to the third Sapphira is Corsia, the throne, and the angels assigned to this Sapphira are called the Aralim, which also means thrones. Now a throne essentially suggests the idea of a stable basis, a firm foundation, upon which the wielder of power takes his seat and cannot be moved. It is, in fact, a thrust block which takes the back pressure of a force as the shoulder takes the kick of a rifle. The great guns used for long-distance ranging have to be bedded in a mass of concrete in order that they may resist this back pressure of the charge that drives the shell forwards. For it is obvious that the pressure on the breech of the gun must equal the pressure on the base of the shell when the gun goes off. This is a truth which our idealizing religious tendencies are inclined to ignore, with a consequent weakening and invalidating of their teaching. Bina, Mara, matter, is the thrust block which gives dynamic life force its secure basis. 45. Out of the resistance to spiritual force, as we have already noted, comes the idea of implicit evil, which is so unjust as Bina. This comes out very clearly when we consider the ideas that rise up in association with Saturn Chronos. There is something sinister about Saturn. He is the greater malefic of the astrologers, and anyone who finds a square to Saturn in their horoscope regards it as a heavy affliction. Saturn is the resistor. But, being a resistor, he is also a stabilizer and tester who does not allow us to trust our weight to that which will not bear it. It is an illuminating point that the 32nd path, which leads from Makath to Yesod and is the first path trodden by the soul striving upwards, is assigned to Saturn. He is the god of the most ancient form of matter. The Greek myth of Kronos, which is simply the Greek name for the same principle, looks upon him as one of the old gods, that is to say, the gods that made the gods. He was the father of Jupiter Zeus, who was saved from him by a cunning device of his mother, for Saturn had an unpleasant habit of eating his children. In this myth we get again the idea of the bringer into life as the giver of death. As we have already noted, Saturn with his reaping hook readily becomes death with his scythe. It is very interesting to note the reentrant curves of these chains of associated ideas in connection with each Sapphira, for we cannot but see how the same images crop up again and again in every train of ideas that we pursue. Even when we start from ideas as apparently divergent as the mother, the sea, and time. 46. To each planet is assigned a virtue and a vice. In other words, each planet may be, in the words of the astrologers, well or badly aspect, well or ill dignified. We cannot go through life without noting that every type of character has the vices of its virtues, that is to say, its virtues, carried to extremes, becomes vices. So it is with the 7 planetary Sephiroth. They have their good and bad aspects according to the proportions in which they are represented. When there is lack of equilibrium owing to the unbalanced force of a particular Sapphira, we experience the evil influences of that Sapphira. For instance, Saturn ate his children. Death began to destroy life before it had fulfilled its function. No Sapphira, therefore, is wholly and solely evil, not even Gebura, which is destruction personified. They are all equally indispensable to the scheme of things as a whole, and their relative good or evil influence depends on their being where they are wanted, in the right proportions, neither too much nor too little. Too little of the influence of a given Sapphira leads to unbalance on the part of its opposite number. Too much becomes a positively evil influence, a poisonous overdose. 47. The virtue of Bina is said to be silence, and its vice avarice. Here again we see the Saturn influence making itself felt. Keats speaks of gray-haired Saturn, silent as a stone, and in these few words the poet conjures up a magical image of the primordial age and silence of the Saturnian influence. Saturn is indeed one of the old gods and is concerned with the mineral aspect of earth. He is throned upon the most ancient rocks where no plant grows. 48. It is this silence which has ever been held to be an especially desirable virtue in women. Be that as it may, and no doubt her tongue is her most dangerous weapon, silence indicates receptivity. If we are silent, we can listen, and so learn. But if we are talking, the gates of entrance to the mind are closed. It is the resistance and receptivity of Bina which are her chief powers. And out of these virtues comes the vice which is constituted by their overplus, the avarice which denies too much and would withhold even that which is needful. When this prevails, we need the generous Gedula Gebura, Jupiter-Mars influence to slay the old god, the slayer of his children, and reign in his stead. 49. The magical symbols of Bina are said to be the yoni and the outer robe of concealment. The latter is a Gnostic term and the former an Indian one, meaning the genitals of the female, the negative correspondence of the phallus of the male. The less well-known term ties is the European equivalent. In Hindu religious symbols the yoni and lingam appear with the greatest frequency, for the idea of life force and fertility is a prime mover in their faith. 50. The idea of fertility is the main motif in the aspects of Bina that manifest in the world of Asaya, the material level. Life not only enters into matter for discipline, but it also issues thence triumphantly, increased and multiplied. The fertility aspect, balancing the time-death limitation aspect, is essential to our concept of Bina. Time-death puts his sickle to the wheat of Ceres, and both are Bina symbols. 51. The idea of the outer robe of concealment clearly suggests matter, and the shrouding herein of the inner robe of glory of the life principle. How clearly do these two ideas, taken together, convey to us the concept of the body ensouled by the spirit, its inner robe of spiritual glory concealed from all eyes by the outer covering of dense matter. Again and again, as we meditate upon these mysteries, do we find illumination from the apparently fortuitous collection of symbols assigned to each Sapphira. We have seen already in our study that no symbol stands alone, and that any penetration on the part of the intuition and the imagination serves to reveal long lines of interlacing connections between them. 52. The 4 threes of the tarot pack are the cards assigned to Bina, and indeed the number 3 is intimately associated with the idea of manifestation in matter. The 2 opposing forces find expression in a third, the equilibrium between them, which manifests on a lower plane than its parents. The triangle is one of the symbols assigned to Saturn as the god of densest matter, and the triangle of art, as it is called, is used in magical ceremonies, and it is the intention to evoke a spirit to visible appearance on the plane of matter. For other modes of manifestation the circle is used. 53. The 3 of Wands is called the Lord of established strength. Here again we have the idea of power in equilibrium, which is so characteristic of Bina. Wands, be it remembered, represent the dynamic Yud force. This force, when in the sphere of Bina, ceases to be dynamic and becomes consolidated. 54. Cups are essentially the female force, for the cup or chalice is one of the symbols of Bina and is intimately allied with the yoni in esoteric symbolism. The 3 of Cups is, therefore, at home in Bina, for the 2 sets of symbols reinforce each other. The 3 of Cups, which is aptly named abundance, represents the fertility of Bina in her Ceres aspect. 55. The 3 of Swords, however, is called sorrow, and its symbol in the tarot pack is a heart pierced by 3 swords. Our readers will recall the reference to the sword-pierced heart of the Virgin Mary in Catholic symbolism, and Mary equates with Mara, bitter, the sea. Ave, Maria, Stella Maris. 56. Swords are, of course, Gabura cards, and as such represent the destructive aspect of Bina as Kali, the wife of Shiva, the Hindu goddess of destruction. 57. Pentacles are cards of earth, and as such are congenial to Bina, form. The 3 of Pentacles, therefore, is lord of material works, or activity on the plane of form. 58. It will be observed that, just as the planets have their influence reinforced when they are in those signs of the zodiac which are called their own houses, so the tarot cards. When the significance of the Sapphira coincides with the spirit of the suit, represent the active aspect of the influence. And when the Sapphira and the suit represent different influences, the card is malefic. For instance, the fiery sword card is a card of evil omen when it finds itself in the sphere of influence of Bina. 59, and finally to sum up. I have written of Bina at this length because with her is completed the supernal triad and the first of the pairs of opposites. She represents not only herself but also the functioning partners, for it is impossible to understand any unit on the tree save by reference to those other units with which it interacts and equilibrates. Chakma without Bina, and Bina without Chakma, are incomprehensible, for the pair are the functional unit, and not either of them separately. Chesed, the 4th Sapphira. Title, Chesed, Mercy. Hebrew, Cheth, Samek, Daleth. Magical image, a mighty crowned and throned king. Situation on the tree, in the center of the pillar of mercy. Yetziratic text, the 4th path is called the cohesive or receptive intelligence because it contains all the holy powers, and from it emanate all the spiritual virtues with the most exalted essences. They emanate one from another by virtue of the primordial emanation, the highest crown, Kether. Titles given to Chesed, Gedula. Love. Majesty. God name, El. Archangel, Tzadkiel. Order of angels, Kasmalim, brilliant ones. Mundane chakra, Tzedek, Jupiter. Spiritual experience, vision of love. Virtue, obedience. Vice, bigotry. Hypocrisy. Gluttony. Tyranny. Correspondence in microcosm, the left arm. Symbols: the solid figure, tetrahedron. Pyramid. Equal-armed cross. Orb. Wand. Scepter. Crook. Tarot cards, the 4 fours. 4 of Wands, perfected work. 4 of Cups, pleasure. 4 of Swords, rest from strife. 4 of Pentacles, earthly power. Color in Atziluth, violet. Deep. Berach, blue. Yetzirah, deep purple. Asaya, deep azure, flecked yellow. 1. Between the 3 supernals and the next pair of balancing Sephiroth upon the tree there is a great gulf fixed which is called by mystics the Abyss. The next 6 Sephiroth, Chesed, Geburah, Tifereth, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod, constitute what Kabbalists call microprosopos, the lesser countenance, Adam Kadmon, the king. The queen, the bride of the king, is Mawkuth, the physical plane. We have, then, the father, Kether, the king, and the bride, and in this configuration of the tree there is profound symbolism and great practical importance in both philosophy and magic. 2. The abyss, the gulf fixed between macroprosopos and microprosopos, marks a demarcation in the nature of being, in the type of existence prevailing upon the 2 levels. It is in the abyss that Dath, the invisible Sapphira, has its station, and it might aptly be named the Sapphira of becoming. It is also called understanding, which might be further interpreted as perception, apprehension, consciousness. 3. These 2 types of existence, macroprosopos and microprosopos, serve to indicate the potential and the actual. Actual manifestation, as our finite minds can conceive it, begins with microprosopos. And the first aspect of microprosopos to come into being is Chesed, the 4th Sapphira, situated immediately below Chakma, the Father, in the Pillar of Mercy, of which it is the central Sapphira. It is balanced across the tree by Geburah, severity, and this pair, Geburah and Gedula, form the power and the glory of the final invocation of the Lord's Prayer, the kingdom being, of course, Mawkuth. 4. As we have already seen, we can learn much from the position of a Sapphira in the pattern of the tree, and from the position of Chesed on the Pillar of Mercy we see that it is Chakma upon a lower arc. It is emanated by Bina, a passive Sapphira, and emanates Geburah, a catabolic Sapphira, whose mundane chakra is Mars with all his warlike symbolism, who is Saturn upon a lower arc. 5. From these things we can learn a great deal about Chesed. It is the loving Father, the protector and preserver, just as Chakma is the all-begetter. It continues the work of Chakma, organizing and preserving that which the All-Father has begotten. It balances with mercy the severity of Geburah. It is anabolic, or upbuilding, in contradistinction to the catabolism, or downbreaking of Geburah. 6. These 2 aspects are very well expressed in the magical images assigned to these 2 Sephiroth. These magical images are both kings. That of Chesed a king on his throne, and that of Geburah a king in his chariot, in other words, the rulers of the kingdom in peace and in war, the one a lawgiver and the other a warrior. 7. The analogy of physiology gives us a clear understanding of the significance of these 2 Sephiroth. Metabolism consists of anabolism, or the ingesting and assimilating of food and its building up into tissue, and catabolism, or the breaking down of tissue in active work and the output of energy. The byproducts of catabolism are the fatigue poisons which have to be eliminated from the blood by rest. The life process is an everlasting upbuilding and downbreaking, and Geburah and Gedula, another name for Chesed, represent these 2 processes in the macrocosm. 8. Chesed, being the first Sapphira of microprosopos, or the manifested universe, represents the formulation of the archetypal idea, the concretion of the abstract. When the abstract principle that forms the root of some new activity is formulating in our minds, we are operating in the sphere of Chesed. Let an example serve to make this clear. Supposing an explorer is looking out from a mountain over a newly discovered country and sees that the inland plains lying behind the coastal ranges are fertile. And that a river flows through these plains and makes its way to the sea through a gap in the mountain chain. He thinks of the agricultural wealth of the plains, transport down the river, and a harbor on the estuary. He knows that the scour of the river will have made a tunnel by which ships can come in. In his mind's eye he sees the wharfs and the warehouses, the stores and the dwellings. He wonders whether the mountains contain minerals, and pictures a railway line alongside the river and branch lines up the valleys. He sees the colonists coming in, and the need for a church, a hospital, a jail, and the ubiquitous saloon. His imagination maps out the main street of the township, and he determines to stake corner lots that he may prosper with the prosperity of the new settlement. All this he sees while virgin forest covers the coastal belt and blocks the mountain passes. But because he knows that the plains are fertile and that the river has come through the mountains, he sees in terms of first principles all the development that follows. While his mind is working thus, he is functioning in the sphere of Chesed whether he knows it or not. And all those who can also function in terms of Chesed and think ahead as he does, seeing the thing that must arise from given causes long before the first line is drawn on the plan or the first brick laid in the trench, are able to possess themselves of the valuable land where the wharfs must be built and the main street must run. 9. All the creative work of the world is done thus, by minds working in terms of Chesed, the king seated upon his throne, holding scepter and orb, ruling and guiding his people. 10. By contrast with this we observe the people whose minds cannot function above the level of Macheth, the bride of the king. They are the folk who cannot see the wood for trees. They think in terms of detail, lacking any synthetic principle. Their logic is never able to reach back to origins but is always materialistic. They are never able to discern subtle causes, and are the victims of what they call the caprices of chance. They are unable to discern subtle conditions, nor can they work out the line that primary impulses will follow, or can be made to follow, when these are coming down, or being brought down, into manifestation. 11. The occultist who does not possess the initiation of Chesed will be limited in his function to the sphere of Yesod, the plane of Maya, illusion. For him the astral images reflected in the magic mirror of subconsciousness will be actualities. He will make no attempt to translate them into terms of a higher plane and learn what they really represent. He will have made himself a dwelling in the sphere of illusion, and he will be deluded by the phantasms of his own unconscious projection. If he were able to function in terms of Chesed, he would perceive the underlying archetypal ideas of which these magical images are but the shadows and symbolic representations. He then becomes a master in the treasure house of images instead of being hallucinated by them. He can use the images as a mathematician uses algebraic symbols. He works magic as an initiated adept and not as a magician. 12. The mystic functioning in the Christ center of Tifereth, if he lacks the keys of Chesed, will also be hallucinated, but in a different and more subtle way. Upon this level he will read the magical images truly enough, referring them to that which they represent and giving them no values save as tokens, as Saint Teresa has so clearly shown in her interior castle. He will fall into the error, however, of thinking that the images he perceives and the experiences he undergoes are the direct and personal dealings of God with his soul, instead of realizing that they are stages on the path. He will find a personal savior in the God-man instead of in the regenerative influence of the Christ force. He will worship Jesus of Nazareth as God the Father, thus confounding the persons. 13. Chesed, then, is the sphere of the formulation of the archetypal idea. The apprehension by consciousness of an abstract concept which is subsequently brought down the planes and concreted in the light of experience of the concretion of analogous abstract ideas. Equally, in its macrocosmic aspect, it represents a corresponding phase in the process of creation. Materialistic science believes that the only abstract concepts are those formulated by the mind of man. Esoteric science teaches that the divine mind formulated archetypal ideas in order that substance might take form, and that without such archetypal ideas substance was formless and void. Primordial slime awaiting the breath of life to organize into the crystal and cell. The latest researches in physics have revealed that every substance, without exception, has a crystalline structure, and the lines of tension that the psychic perceives as etheric stresses have been revealed by the X-rays. 14. A very important and very imperfectly understood part in the mysteries is played by those beings who are generally called the Masters. Different schools define the term differently, and some include living adepts of a high grade among the Masters. But we consider that it is advisable to make a distinction between the incarnate and disincarnate elder brethren because their mission and mode of function are entirely different. The title of Master should therefore be given only to those who are free from the wheel of birth and death. In the terminology of the Western esoteric tradition, the grade of Adeptus Exemptus is assigned to Chisid, the term exemptus, or exempt, indicating that freedom from karma which liberates from the wheel. I am fully aware that others may attach a different significance to the title, and that there are persons in incarnation who hold this grade. To these I reply that such persons, if the grade be a functioning one and not a mere empty honor, are karma-free and will not reincarnate. Such persons might justly be termed masters, for their consciousness is of the grade of a master, but as it is so necessary to make the distinction between incarnate and disincarnate adepts, it is better to qualify the classification by this minor distinction than to allow to humans a prestige which human nature is not fitted to bear. As long as an adept is incarnated, he will be liable to human frailties in some degree, and to the limitations imposed by old age and physical health. It is not until he is free from the wheel, and functions as pure consciousness, that he will escape from human bondage to heredity and environment. Therefore the same reliance cannot be placed in him that can be placed in the true, disincarnate masters. 15. A very important part of the work of the masters is the concretion of the abstract ideas conceived by the logoidal consciousness. The Logos, whose meditation gives birth to worlds and whose unfolding consciousness is evolution, conceives archetypal ideas out of the substance of the unmanifest, to use a metaphor where definition is impossible. These ideas remain within the cosmic consciousness of the Logos like the seed within the flower, because there is no soil therein for their germination. The logoidal consciousness, as pure being, cannot upon its own plane provide the formative aspect necessary for manifestation. It is taught in the esoteric traditions that the masters, disincarnate consciousnesses disciplined by form but now formless, in their meditations upon the Godhead are able to perceive telepathically these archetypal ideas in the mind of God. And by realizing the practical application of them to the planes of form and the line, this development will follow. Produce concrete images in their own consciousness which serve to bring the abstract archetypal ideas down to the first of the planes of form, called by the Kabbalists, Bria. 16. This, then, is the work that the masters perform in their special sphere, the sphere of the organizing, upbuilding, constructive Chisid on the pillar of mercy. The work of the dark masters, who are quite different from the black adepts, is performed in the corresponding sphere of Gebura, on the pillar of severity, which will be considered in due course. The point of contact between the masters and their human disciples is in Had, the Sapphira of ceremonial magic, as is indicated by the Yetziratic text, which declares that from Gedula, the fourth Sapphira emanates the essence of Had. These hints given in the Yetziratic texts concerning the relations between the individual Sephiroth are very important in practical occultism. Had, then, may be taken as representing Chakma and Chisid upon a lower arc, even as Netzach represents Bina and Gebura. This will be explained in detail when these Sephiroth are dealt with, but it must be referred to briefly now in order to make the function of Chisid intelligible. 17. We have now reached a point in the scheme of the tree where the type of activity comes within the range of human consciousness. In the study of the preceding Sephiroth we were formulating metaphysical concepts. These concepts, although remote from immediate application to the life of form, are exceedingly important, for unless they are at the basis of our understanding of esoteric science we shall fall into superstition and use magic as magicians, not as adepts. In other words, we shall be unable to transcend the bondage of the planes of form and will be hallucinated and fall under the domination of the phantoms evoked by the magical imagination. Instead of using them as the beads on the abacus of our calculations, which is as if the engineer used the slide rule as if it were a foot rule. 18. Chisid, then, reflects into Had through the Christ center of Tifereth, just as Geburah reflects into Netzach. This teaches us a great deal, for it indicates that for consciousness to rise from form to force, and for force to descend to form, it must pass through the center of equilibrium and redemption, to which are assigned the mysteries of the crucifixion. 19. It is to the sphere of Chesed that the exalted consciousness of the adept rises in his occult meditations. It is here that he receives the inspirations which he works out on the planes of form. It is here that he meets the masters as spiritual influences contacted telepathically, without any intermingling of personality. This is the true, and the highest mode of contact with the masters, contact with them as mind to mind in their own sphere of exalted consciousness. When the masters are seen clairvoyantly as robed beings, the colors of whose robes indicate their ray, they are being perceived reflected into the sphere of Yesod, which is the kingdom of phantasms and hallucinations. We are treading on precarious ground when we have to meet the masters here. It is here that the anthropomorphic form is given to the spiritual inspiration which so misleads those psychics who cannot rise to Chesed. It is thus that the announcement of a spiritual impulse flowing out upon the world gets interpreted as the coming of a world teacher. 20. As we come down the tree into those spheres more within the range of our comprehension than the three supernals, we find the symbols associated with each sapphira becoming more and more eloquent as they speak to our experience instead of causing us to reason by analogy. 21. The magical image representing Chesed is a mighty throned and crowned king, throned because he is seated in stability in a kingdom at peace, not going forth in his chariot to war, as is suggested by the magical image of Geburah. The additional titles of Chesed, majesty, love, bear out this concept of the benignant king, the father of his people. And the situation of Chesed in the center of the pillar of mercy further bears out the idea of stability and ordered and merciful law, governing for the good of the governed. The title of the angelic host associated with Chesed, the Chasmalim, or brilliant ones, enhances the idea of the royal splendor of Geburah, which is an alternative title frequently used for Chesed. The mundane chakra assigned to Chesed, Jupiter, the great benignity of astrology, confirms the whole chain of associations. 22. Upon the microcosmic, or subjective, side we find that the virtue assigned to this sphere of experience is that of obedience. It is only through the virtue of obedience that the subject can profit by the wise rule of Chesed. We have to sacrifice much of our independence and egoism in order to share in the amenities of organized social life. From this sacrifice and restriction there is no escape. In this sphere no more than in any other is impossible to eat one's cake and have it. There is no such thing as liberty if liberty is to be interpreted as unrestricted self-will. The force of gravity resists us, if nothing else. Liberty might be defined as the right to choose one's master, for a ruler one must have in all organized corporate life, else there is chaos. It is effectual and inspiring leadership that is the crying need of the world at the present time, and country after country is seeking and finding the ruler who approximates most closely to its national ideal, and is falling in as one man behind him. It is the benign, organized in the ordering Jupiter influence that is the only medicine for the world's sickness. As this comes to bear, the nations will recover their emotional poise and physical health. 23. Conversely, the vices assigned to Chesed, bigotry, hypocrisy, gluttony, and tyranny, are all social vices. Bigotry refuses to move with the times or see another point of view, both fatal vices in racial relationships. Hypocrisy implies that we do not give ourselves wholeheartedly to the corporate life, but, like Ananias, keep back a part of the price. Gluttony exposes us to the temptation of taking more than our fair share of the common store, and is but another name for selfishness. And tyranny is that wrong use of authority which arises where there are taints of cruelty and vanity in the nature. 24. The correspondence in the microcosm is given as the left arm, which indicates a less dynamic mode of the functioning of power than that of the right hand which grasps the sword in the magical image of Geburah. The left hand holds the orb, which signifies the earth itself, and shows that all is held secure in the firm grasp of the ruler. Chesed, in fact, denotes firmness rather than dynamic strength and energy. 25. The mystical number of Chesed is said to be 4, and this is often represented as a four-sided figure, or tetrahedron. A talisman of Jupiter is always set up on such a figure. Another symbol of Chesed is the solid figure as understood in geometry. The reason for this is easily seen if one considers the geometrical figures assigned to the Sephiroth which have already been studied. The point is assigned to Kether. The line to Chakma, the two-dimensional plane to Bina, consequently the three-dimensional solid naturally falls to Chesed. 26. But more is signified in this connection than a mere random series of symbols. The solid essentially represents manifestation as it is known to our three-dimensional consciousness. We cannot conceive of one- or two-dimensional existence save mathematically or symbolically. Chesed, as we have already noted, is the first of the manifested Sephiroth, therefore how naturally does the symbol of the solid figure come into line with the rest of its symbolism. The solid figure used for the purpose of symbolizing Chesed is usually the pyramid, which is a four-sided figure, consisting of 3 faces and a base, thus expressing the numerological quality of Chesed. 27. There are many different aspects of the cross as a significant mystery symbol, besides the Calvary cross of the Christian mystery, and each of these crosses represents different modes of the functioning of spiritual power. Just as do the different forms of the holy names of God. The form of cross associated with Chesed is the equal-armed cross, which is symbolic of the 4 elements in equilibrium, and implies the ruling of nature by a synthesizing influence which brings all things into balanced harmony. 28. The orb, wand, scepter, and crook, all assigned to this Sapphira, express so perfectly the different aspects of the benign royal power of Chesed that they are in no need of elucidation. 29. The 4 tarot cards that are placed on Chesed and the pack is set up for a divination carry out the ruling idea in the correspondence. The 4 of Wands symbolizes perfected work, thus representing admirably the achievement of the king in peacetime in his well-governed kingdom. The 4 of Cups is called the Lord of Pleasure, and is in keeping with the title of splendor assigned to Chesed and with the brilliancy of its angelic host. The 4 of Swords indicates rest from strife, and agrees perfectly with the significance of the seated ruler. The 4 of Pentacles is the Lord of earthly power, a symbolism so obvious that it needs no elucidation. 30. The consideration of the Yetziratic text has been left to the last in this study, in order that the sequence of the symbolism, unfolding in such ordered relationship, might not be broken in upon. Moreover, this text contains so much significance that it is best studied when we are as fully equipped as possible with the cognate symbolism. Much that relates to the thing contained in this text, however, has already been studied as it came up for examination in relation to the preceding Sephiroth. I will not repeat this at length, but content myself with referring the student to those pages where the matters are dealt with in detail, thus avoiding needless repetition which otherwise is bound to occur in the study of such a subject as the Tree of Life, where different symbols represent the same potency upon different levels of manifestation or under different aspects. 31. The 4th path is called the cohesive intelligence. How clearly can we see the meaning of these words when we have learnt to look upon Chesed through the symbol of the king seated upon his throne, organizing the resources and prosperity of his kingdom, and causing all things to be drawn together into an ordered whole for the common good. 32. It is also called the receptive intelligence in the Yetziratic text, and this is borne out in the symbol of the left arm, which is assigned to this Sapphira in the microcosm. 33. Chesed contains all the holy powers, and from it emanate all the spiritual virtues with the most exalted essences. The teaching implicit in this statement has already been elucidated in the previous exegesis under the concept of archetypal ideas. 34. They emanate one from another by virtue of the primordial emanation, the highest crown, Kether. These concepts have already been dealt with in relation to the second Sapphira, Chakma, when the overflowing of force from sphere to sphere was considered. Gebura, the 5th Sapphira. Title, Gebura, Strength, Severity. Hebrew, Gimel, Beth, Vav, Resh, He. Magical image, a mighty warrior in his chariot. Situation on the tree, in the center of the pillar of severity. Yetziratic text. The fifth path is called the radical intelligence because it resembles unity, uniting itself to Bina, understanding, which emanates from the primordial depths of Chakma, wisdom. Titles given to Gebura: Din, justice. Pakhad, fear. God name, Elohim Jiber. Archangel, Kamal. Host of angels, seraphim, fiery serpents. Mundane chakra, Madam, Mars. Spiritual experience, vision of power. Virtue, energy. Courage. Vice, cruelty. Destruction. Correspondence in microcosm, the right arm. Symbols, the pentagon. The five-petaled Tudor rose. The sword. The spur. The scourge. The chain. Tarot cards, the four fives. Five of wands, strife. Five of cups, loss in pleasure. Five of swords, defeat. Five of pentacles, earthly trouble. Color in Atziluth, orange. Brh, scarlet red. Yetzirah, bright scarlet. Asaya, red, flecked with black. 1. One of the least understood things in Christian philosophy is the problem of evil, and one of the things least adequately dealt with in the Christian ethic is the problem of force, or severity, as contrasted with mercy and mildness. Consequently Gebura, the fifth Sephira, which has for additional titles Din, justice, and Pakhad, fear, is one of the least understood of all the Sephiroth, and is therefore one of the most important. Were it not that the Kabbalistic doctrine explicitly lays it down that all the 10 Sephiroth are holy, there are many who would be inclined to look upon Gebura as the evil aspect of the tree of life. Indeed, the planet Mars, whose sphere is the mundane chakra of Gebura, is called in astrology and in fortune. 2. Those, however, who are instructed beyond the crude pretty of a wish-fulfilling philosophy know that Gebura is by no means the enemy or adversary described in Scripture. But the king in his chariot going forth to war, whose strong right arm protects his people with the sword of righteousness and ensures that justice shall be done. Chesed, the king on his throne, the father of his people in times of peace, may win our love, but it is Gebura, the king in his chariot, going forth to war, who commands our respect. Sufficient justice has not been done to the part played by the sentiment of respect in the emotion of love. We have a kind of love for the person who can put the fear of God into us, should occasion arise, which is of quite a different quality, is far more steadfast and permanent, and, curiously enough, far more emotionally satisfying than the love with which no tinge of awe is mingled. It is Gebura that supplies the element of awe, of the fear of the Lord, which is the beginning of wisdom, and of a general wholesome respect which helps us to keep to the straight and narrow way and calls forth our better nature. Because we know our sins will find us out. 3. This is a factor to which the Christian ethic, as popularly understood, does not give sufficient weight. And because the general tone of Christian society is biased against the holy fifth Sephira, it will be necessary to consider its place in relation to the tree and the part it plays in both spiritual and social life in considerable detail. For it is ill understood, and this absence of understanding of the Gebura factor is the cause of many of our difficulties in modern life. For, Gebura holds the central position on the pillar of severity. It therefore represents the catabolic, or downbreaking aspect of force. Catabolism, be it remembered, is that aspect of metabolism, or the life process, which is combined with the release of force in activity. It has been said that good is that which is constructive, which builds up, and evil is that which is destructive, which breaks down. How false this philosophy is we see when we try to classify, according to this principle, a cancer and a disinfectant. In the deeper, more philosophical teaching of the mysteries we recognize that good and evil are not things in themselves, but conditions. Evil is simply misplaced force. Misplaced in time, if it is out of date, or so far ahead of its day as to be impracticable. Misplaced in space, if it turns up in the wrong place, like the burning coal on the hearthrug or the bath water through the drawing-room ceiling. Misplaced in proportion, if an excess of love makes us silly and sentimental, or a lack of love makes us cruel and destructive. It is in such things as these that evil lies, not in a personal devil who acts as adversary. 5. Gabura the destroyer, the lord of fear and severity, is therefore as necessary to the equilibrium of the tree as Chesid, the lord of love, and Netzach, the lady of beauty. Gabura is the celestial surgeon. He is the knight in shining armor, the dragon slayer, beautiful as a bridegroom in his strength to the maiden in distress, though, no doubt, the dragon might have preferred a little more love. 6. The initiations of the infortunes, Saturn, Mars, and the deceptive lunar Yesod, are just as necessary to the evolution and balanced development of the soul as are the mysteries of the crucifixion assigned to Tifereth. It is the one-sidedness of Christianity which is its bane, and is responsible for so much that is unsound and pathological in both our national and our private lives. But, equally, we must not forget that Christianity as a corrective to a pagan world that was sick unto death with its own toxins. We need what Christianity has to give, but also, unfortunately, we cannot do without that which it lacks. Let us now consider the astringent, corrective influence of Gabura. 7. Dynamic energy is as necessary to the welfare of society as meekness, charity, and patience. We must never forget that the eliminatory diet, which will restore health in disease, will produce disease in health. We must never exalt the qualities which are necessary to compensate an overplus of force into ends in themselves and the means of salvation. Too much charity is the handiwork of a fool, too much patience is the hallmark of a coward. What we need is a just and wise balance which makes for health, happiness, and sanity all round, and the frank realization that sacrifices are necessary to obtain it. You cannot eat your cake and have it in the spiritual sphere any better than anywhere else. 8. Gabura is the sacrificial priest of the mysteries. Now sacrifice does not mean giving up something that is dear to you, because a jealous God will brook no rival interests in his devotees and is flattered by your pain. It means the deliberate and open-eyed choice of a greater good in preference to a lesser good, and the athlete prefers the fatigue of exercise to the ease of the sloth that puts him out of condition. Coal burned in a furnace is sacrificed to the god of steam power. Sacrifice is really the transmutation of force. The latent energy in the coal offered up on the sacrificial altar of the furnace is transmuted into the dynamic energy of steam by means of the appropriate machinery. 9. There is both psychological and cosmic machinery available in connection with every act of sacrifice which converts it into spiritual energy. And this spiritual energy can be applied to other mechanisms and reappear on the planes of form as an entirely different type of force to that as which it started. 10. For instance, a man may sacrifice his emotions to his career. Or a woman may sacrifice her career to her emotions. If the cut is clean, and there is no repining, an immense amount of psychic energy is released for use in the chosen channel. But if the lesser desire is merely inhibited and denied expression and not really laid upon the altar of sacrifice as a deliberate free will offering, the unfortunate victim has made the worst of both worlds. It is here that we need Gabura to come like the priest that takes the sacrifice from our hands, even if it be our firstborn, and offers it up to God with the quick, clean, merciful stroke. For Gabura in the microcosm, which is the soul of man, is the courage and resolution that frees us from the taint of self-pity. 11. How badly do we need the Spartan virtues of Gabura in this age of sentimentality and the neuroses? How many breakdowns would be saved if this celestial surgeon were permitted to make the clean cut that has a chance to heal, and so avoid the deadly compromise and irresolution that is like an open wound and so often goes septic. 12. And again, if there were no strong hand at the service of good in the world, evil would multiply. Though it is not well to quench smoking flax when the flax is making an effort, it is equally evil to put up with the smoldering when what it really wants is the use of the poker. There is a place where patience becomes weakness and wastes the time of better men, and when mercy becomes folly and exposes the innocent to danger. The policy of non-resistance to evil can only be pursued satisfactorily in a well-policed society. It has never been tried with success under frontier conditions. For nature, red in tooth and claw, wears the color of Gabura. Whereas the compensatory civilization is of Chesed, mercy, which modifies the unrestricted force and mutual destructiveness of all that is in the Geburah phase of its development. But, equally, we must remember that civilization rests upon nature as a building rests upon its foundations, wherein is concealed the sanitation so necessary to health. 13. Whenever there is anything that has outlived its usefulness, Geburah must wield the pruning knife. Wherever there is selfishness, it must find itself impaled on the spear point of Geburah. Wherever there is violence against the weak, or the merciless use of strength, it is the sword of Geburah, not the orb of Chesed, that is the most effectual counteractant. Wherever there is sloth and dishonesty, Geburah's sacred scourge is needed. And where there is a removal of the landmark set for our neighbor's protection, it is the chain of Geburah that must restrain. 14. These things are as necessary to the health of society and of the individual as brotherly love, and a good deal rarer, used medicinally and not vengefully, in our sentimental age. Someone has got to cry, halt, to the aggressor, and move on, to those who are blocking the way, and that someone is functioning as a priest in the sphere of the holy fifth Sapphira. 15. If we watch life we shall see that rhythm, not stability, is its vital principle. Such stability as manifesting existence achieves is the stability of a man on a bicycle, balanced between two opposing poles. He can fall over to the right, or he can fall over to the left, and he keeps his balance by means of his momentum. 16. In the life of individuals, in the development of any transaction, in the tone of any disciplined or highly organized group mind, we see the constant alternation of the Geburah and Gedulah influences in a rhythmic swing from one side to the other. Anyone who is responsible for the disciplining of an organized group knows the constant need for tightening and slackening the reins, for stimulating and steadying. There is a sense of the need to pay out line as the group surges forward with an impulse of interest and keenness, followed by the need to take up the slack as the impulse spends itself. If the slack is not taken up with a firm hand, the group tangles itself in the loops and waxes insubordinate. The wise handler of humans knows when the reaction has spent itself, and the moment has come to crack the whip of Geburah over the team and make it jump into the collar again as the new dynamic impulse surges up. But he also knows that he must not crack it too soon, while the team is having a breather, or one of the less stable units will get a leg over the traces. 17. Especially do we see the alternating rhythms of Geburah and Gedulah in national life. I venture to prophesy that the nation is passing out of a Gedulah phase and entering a Geburah one. Everywhere we see a mercy that has been overstrained by the imperfections of human nature, being abrogated in favor of a severity which shall restore the balance of even-handed justice and prevent evil from multiplying. Police work is being reorganized, judges are giving stiffer sentences, penal reform has had a setback, the humanitarian no longer has the last word. The group soul of the race is entering upon a Geburah phase, and has lost patience with its substandard units. 18. For the next cycle the tendency will be to push the unfit into the discard and concentrate on bringing the fit to their finest development. Geburah will be the senior partner, and any mitigations of severity that Gedulah proposes will have to pass the scrutiny of even-handed justice. This is a very necessary reform, for towards the end of a phase extremes tend to develop, and the humanitarianism of Gedulah has been abused and made ridiculous, and its refinement has become finicking and lost touch with actualities. 19. When a new phase comes in on a group mind scale, it is upon the least enlightened, the most crowd-minded that its influence is strongest. The cultured always tend to stand aside from extremes. We see this clearly indicated in the line taken by the various types of journalism. Popular journalism is crying out for the free use of the cat as a punishment for crime, for the repudiation of debts and international agreements. For, in fact, a general slashing around with the sword of Geburah. There is on every hand a growing tendency to stand no nonsense from anybody. A tendency which makes negotiations exceedingly difficult to carry on, for Geburah is at his worst as a negotiator, his one contribution to the discussion being that of the Greek soldier who took his sword and cut the knot. 20. Now the initiate, knowing that phase succeeds phase in rhythmic alternation, does not take any phase too seriously, nor think that it is either the end of the world or the millennium. He knows that it will run its course, being at first a valuable and necessary corrective, and in the end running to extremes. But provided there is sufficient vision among the Illuminati of a race, the people will not perish, for the very fact of extremes being arrived at indicates the end of the swing. And the pendulum will normally reverse its motion and start coming back towards the center of stability. It is only when vision is completely lost to a people that the pendulum is allowed to fly off its hook into self-destruction. Rome did it, Carthage did it, more recently Russia has done it. But even when social organization breaks down and the pendulum has gone off into space, the principle of rhythm is inherent in all manifesting existence. And re-establishes itself as soon as any sort of organization begins to arise out of the wreckage. 21. The great weakness of Christianity lies in the fact that it ignores rhythm. It balances God with devil instead of Vishnu with Shiva. Its dualisms are antagonistic instead of equilibrating, and therefore can never issue in the functional third in which power is in equilibrium. Its God is the same yesterday, today, and forever, and does not evolve with an evolving creation, but indulges in one special creative act and rests on his laurels. The whole of human experience, the whole of human knowledge, is against the likelihood of such a concept being true. 22. The Christian concept being static, not dynamic, it does not see that because a thing is good, its opposite is not necessarily evil. It has no sense of proportion because it has no realization of the principle of equilibrium in space and rhythm in time. Consequently, for the Christian ideal the part is all too often greater than the whole. Meekness, mercy, purity and love are made the ideal of Christian character, and as Nietzsche truly points out, these are slave virtues. There should be room in our ideal for the virtues of the ruler and leader, courage, energy, justice, and integrity. Christianity has nothing to tell us about the dynamic virtues, consequently those who get the world's work done cannot follow the Christian ideal because of its limitations and inapplicability to their problems. They can measure right and wrong against no standard save their own self-respect. The result is the ridiculous spectacle of a civilization, committed to a one-sided ideal, being forced to keep its ideals and its honor in separate compartments. 23. We need Gebura's realism to balance Geshe-la's idealism quite as much as we need to temper justice with mercy. Experience in the handling of children soon teaches us that the child that is never checked is a spoilt child. That the youth who lacks the spur of competition is apt to be a slack youth, for it is only the few who will work for work's sake. And so it is with nations, the monopoly, lacking the spur of competition, has always proved itself to be ineffectual. The non-competitive professions always suffer from intellectual obesity. 24. Gebura is the dynamic element in life that drives through and over obstacles. The character which is lacking in Martian aspects never gets to grips with life. Those who have had to depend on a non-Gebura breadwinner know that love is not a complete solution of life's problems. We must learn to love and trust the mailed warrior with the sword as well as divine love which gives us the cup of cold water and says, "Come unto me all ye that are weary and heavy laden." 25. When we have learned to kiss the rod and realized the value of astringent experiences we have taken the first of the Gebura initiations, and when we have learnt to lose our lives in order to find them, we have taken the second. There is a certain type of courage which does not fear dissolution, for it knows that all spiritual principles are indestructible, and so long as the archetypes persist, anything can be rebuilt. Gebura is only destructive to that which is temporal. It is the servant of that which is eternal, for when by the acid activity of Gebura all that is impermanent has been eaten away, the eternal and incorporeal realities shine forth in all their glory, every line revealed. 26. Gebura is the best friend we can have if we are honest. Sincerity has no need to fear his activities. Indeed, it is the greatest we can have against the insincerity of others, for there is nothing to equal the Gebura influence for debunking both persons and viewpoints. 27. Gebura and Geshe-la must work together, never the one without the other. We must adore the God of battles as well as the God of love in order that the combative element in the universe may not break from its allegiance to the one God, I am that I am. The sword must not be cursed as an instrument of the devil, but blessed and dedicated in order that it may never be unsheathed in an unrighteous cause. It must not be cast aside in an impracticable pacifism, but placed at God's service. So that when the command goes forth that the evil thing shall not be suffered any longer, the mighty Kamal, archangel of Geburah, may lead the seraphim into battle, not in destructive rage, but temperately and impersonally in God's service in order that evil may be cleared up and good prevail. 28. So much has already been said concerning the nature of Geburah that a great deal does not remain to say in the analysis of the attribution. 29. The Yetziratic text tells us that the fifth path is called the radical intelligence because it resembles unity. Now unity is one of the titles applied to Kether, therefore we may say that Geburah is akin to Kether on a lower arc. There are several Sephiroth which are thus referred to in the Seper Yetzirah, and these references are very important when arriving at an understanding of their nature. Chokmah is spoken of as the splendor of unity, equaling it. Of Bina it is said that its roots are in Amen, which is also a title of Kether. 30. Geburah is a highly dynamic Sephira, and its energy overflowing into the world of form and energizing it bears a close analogy to the overflowing force of Kether, which is the basis of all manifestation. 31. It is also said of Geburah in the Yetziratic text that it unites itself to Bina, understanding. When we recall that in astrology Saturn, the mundane chakra of Bina, and Mars, the mundane chakra of Geburah, are called the greater and lesser in fortunes, we see that there must be more than a superficial connection between the two. 32. Bina is called the bringer in of death because it is the giver of form to primordial force, thus rendering it static. Geburah is called the destroyer because the fiery Mars force breaks down forms and destroys them. Thus we see that Bina is perpetually binding force into form, and Geburah perpetually breaking up and destroying all forms with its disruptive energy. 33. But equally we must see that it is only when the protecting, preserving influence of Chesed is in abeyance that the destructive influences of Geburah are able to work upon the forms built up by Bina. For the path of the emanations between Bina and Geburah is via Chesed. Geburah is the essential corrective of Bina, without which Bina would bind all creation into rigidity. Bina, in its turn, as is pointed out in the Yetziratic text, emanates from the primordial depths of Chokmah, wisdom. Thus we see that there is a dynamic aspect even to Bina. No Sephira is wholly of one kind of force, for each emanates from a Sephira of the opposite type of polarity to itself, and in its turn emanates a Sephira of opposite polarity. What we really have in the lightning flash is successive phases in the development of a single force, and because these emanate, but do not supersede each other, they remain as planes of manifestation and types of organization. 34. These successive phases and planes of manifestation might be likened to the successive reaches of a river. It starts as a mountain stream, in the next reach is a series of rapids and waterfalls, then come water meadows and placidity. And finally the great waterway between docks bearing shipping. The different reaches of the river remain constant, the type of water in each is constant. Clear and sparkling in the upper reaches, loaded with alluvia among the water meadows, and fouled with grime below the docks. But at the same time the water itself is not constant, for it does not stagnate on any reach, for they are all in unbroken communication the one with the other, they emanate each other, to use the language of the Kabbalah. But the water changes its nature as it progresses because something is added to it by the experiences it undergoes in each reach, alluvial soil from the water meadows, city grime from the docks. 35. So the primordial emanation of Kether becomes modified in each Sephirotic reach of the cosmic river, the reaches, or Sephirotic spheres, remain constant, the emanations flow on, undergoing modification in each sphere. 36. The titles assigned to Geburah of strength, justice, severity, and fear speak for themselves and indicate the dual aspects of this Sephira. Now that we are coming down the tree into the planes of form, we see more and more clearly that every Sapphira is two-sided, and that its overplus tends to unbalanced force. 37. The magical image of a mighty warrior in his chariot, crowned and armed, indicates the dynamic nature of the Kabira force. The mundane chakra of the fiery Mars expresses even more fully the same idea. 38. The spiritual experience that is conveyed by initiation into the sphere of Kabira is the vision of power. It is only when a man has received this that he becomes an adeptus major. The right handling of power is one of the greatest tests that can be imposed on any human being. Up to this point in his progress up the grades, an initiate learns the lessons of discipline, control, and stability. He acquires, in fact, what Nietzsche calls slave morality, a very necessary discipline for unregenerate human nature, so proud in its own conceit. With the grade of adeptus major, however, he must acquire the virtues of the Superman, and learn to wield power instead of to submit to it. But even so, he is not a law unto himself, for he is the servant of the power he wields and must carry out its purposes, not serve his own. Though no longer responsible to his fellow men, he is still responsible to the Creator of heaven and earth, and will be required to give an account of his stewardship. 39. Great freedom is his, but also great strain. He can speak the word of power that unlooses the wind, but he must be prepared to ride the ensuing whirlwind. This is a thing that the amateur magician does not always realize. 40. The energy and courage which are the virtues of Mars, and the cruelty and destruction which are his vices when these qualities run to excess, call for no comment, for they are self-explanatory. 41. The symbols assigned to Mars Kabira need some elucidation, however, as their significance is not in all cases apparent at first sight. 42. Figures with a varying number of sides are assigned to the different planets, and in ceremonial or talismanic magic are used as the outline of any form associated with a planetary force. To Saturn, the oldest planet, the first to develop in evolutionary time, is assigned the simplest two-dimensional figure, the triangle. The balanced stability of Chesed gets the four-sided figure, the square. And to the third planetary Sapphira, Mars, is assigned the five-sided figure, and 5 is looked upon in the Kabbalistic system as the number of Mars. Consequently, the pentagon, the five-sided figure, is the symbol of Mars, and any altar to Mars should be pentagonal or five-sided, likewise any talisman. The five-petaled Tudor rose, which is another symbol of Mars, requires more explanation. But when we remember the intimate association between Mars and Venus in mythology, and that the rose is the flower of Venus, we get a clue to the significance of the symbolism. The lines of force, crossing over on the tree, go from Kabira Mars to Netzach Venus through Tifereth, the place of the Redeemer, the center of equilibrium, in the same way that Chesed and Hod connect up. As is clearly indicated in the Yetziratic text, which says of Hod that it has its root in the hidden places of Gedula, the fourth Sapphira. 43. Realizing, then, the intimate relationship between the diagonal pairs that form the four corners of the central square of the tree, we understand the linked relationship indicated by the form of the rose with its 5 petals. 44. The sword, the spear, the scourge, and the chain are all such characteristic weapons of Mars that no comment is called for. 45. The 4 fives of the tarot pack are all evil cards, each according to its type. In fact, the 5 suit of swords, which is under the presidency of Mars, represents contentiousness for its best aspects are rest from strife and success after struggle. And where a sword card is associated with a Sapphira whose mundane chakra is one of the astrological infortunes, the result is disastrous, and we find the lords of defeat and ruin in this suit. 46. Our ability to take the Kabira initiation depends upon our ability to handle the Martian forces, and this is determined by the degree of self-discipline and stability we have attained in our own natures. 47. Kabira is the most dynamic and forceful of all the Sephiroth, but it is also the most highly disciplined. Indeed, the military discipline, presided over by the god of war, is a synonym for the sternest kind of control that can be imposed upon human beings. The discipline of Geburah must exactly equate with its energy. In other words, the brakes of a car must bear a relationship to its horsepower if it is to be safe on the road. It is this tremendous Geburah discipline which is one of the testing points of the mysteries. We speak of an iron discipline, and iron is the metal of Mars. 48. The initiate of Geburah is a very dynamic and forceful person, but he is also a very controlled person. His characteristic virtues are an even temper and patience under provocation. It is well known on the sports field, which is the playful aspect of the god of war, that a loss of temper gives the game away. Every boxer knows that if he gets angry and starts fighting instead of boxing, the odds are against him. The initiate of Mars is essentially the happy warrior, the initiate who has passed through the grade of Tifereth and gained equilibrium. 49. He fights without malice, he spares the weak and wounded, he does not set out to destroy the law but to see to it that it is properly fulfilled. He is the corrector of the balance, and as such is always the defender of the weak and oppressed. He is never a god that is found on the side of the large armies, although he says, with the froward I will show myself froward. He takes that two-headed giant of the Cliffeth, Thaumiel, the dual contending forces, knocks his heads together and says, a plague on both your houses. Keep God's peace or it will be the worse for you. 50. When a soul is at that stage of development when the only way it can learn is by experience, Geburah sees that it shall not be disappointed when it goes about looking for trouble. Geburah is the great initiator of the swollen-headed. Tifereth, the sixth Sapphira. Title, Tifereth, Beauty. Hebrew, T-O-P-E, Aleph, Resh, T-O. Magical image, a majestic king. A child. A sacrificed god. Situation on the tree, in the center of the pillar of equilibrium. Yetziratic text, the sixth path is called the mediating intelligence, because in it are multiplied the influxes of the emanations, for it causes that influence to flow into all the reservoirs of the blessings with which they themselves are united. Titles given to Tifereth, Zor Anpin, the lesser countenance. Malek, the king. Adam. The son. The man. God name, Tetragrammaton Eloah Va Dath. Archangel, Raphael. Order of angels, Malachim, kings. Mundane chakra, Shemesh, the sun. Spiritual experience, vision of the harmony of things. Mysteries of the crucifixion. Virtue, devotion to the great work. Vice, pride. Correspondence in microcosm, the breast. Symbols, the layman. The rosy cross. The Calvary cross. The truncated pyramid. The cube. Tarot cards, the 4 sixes. 6 of wands, victory. 6 of cups, joy. 6 of swords, earned success. 6 of pentacles, material success. Color in Atziluth, clear rose pink. Brh, yellow. Yetzirah, rich salmon pink. Asaya, golden amber. 1. There are 3 important keys to the nature of Tifereth. Firstly, it is the center of equilibrium of the whole tree, being in the middle of the central pillar. Secondly, it is Kether on a lower arc and Yesod on a higher arc. Thirdly, it is the point of transmutation between the planes of force and the planes of form. The titles that are bestowed on it in Kabbalistic nomenclature bear this out. From the point of view of Kether it is a child, from the point of view of Macheth it is a king, and from the point of view of the transmutation of force it is a sacrificed god. 2. Macrocosmically, that is to say from the Kether standpoint, Tifereth is the equilibrium of Chesed and Geburah. Microcosmically, that is to say from the point of view of transcendental psychology, it is the point where the types of consciousness characteristic of Kether and Yesod are brought to a focus. Hod and Netzach equally find their synthesis in Tifereth. 3. The 6 Sephiroth, of which Tifereth is the center, are sometimes called Adam Kadmon, the archetypal man. In fact, Tifereth cannot rightly be understood save as the central point of these 6, wherein it rules as a king in his kingdom. It is these six which, for all practical purposes, constitute the archetypal kingdom which lies behind the kingdom of form in Mawkuth and completely dominates and determines the passivities of matter. 4. When we have to consider a Sapphira in relation to its neighbors in order to interpret in the light of its position on the tree, it is not possible to proceed with an entirely systematic and orderly exposition of the Kabbalistic system. For we must of necessity forestall with partial explanations if our argument is to be comprehensible. We must therefore give some explanation of the three lower Sephiroth grouped around Tifereth, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod. 5. Netzach is concerned with the nature forces and elemental contacts, Hod with ceremonial magic and occult knowledge, and Yesod with psychism and the etheric double. Tifereth itself, supported by Gebura and Gedula, represents seership, or the higher psychism of the individuality. Each Sapphira, of course, has its subjective and objective aspects, its factor in psychology and its plane in the universe. 6. The four Sephiroth below Tifereth represent the personality or lower self. The four Sephiroth above Tifereth are the individuality, or higher self, and Kether is the divine spark, or nucleus of manifestation. 7. Tifereth, therefore, must never be regarded as an isolated factor, but as a link, a focusing point, a center of transition or transmutation. The central pillar is always concerned with consciousness. The two side pillars with the different modes of the operation of force on the different levels. 8. In Tifereth we find the archetypal ideals brought to a focus and transmuted into archetypal ideas. It is, in fact, the place of incarnation. For this reason it is called the child. And because incarnation of the God ideal also implies the sacrificial disincarnation, to Tifereth are assigned the mysteries of the crucifixion, and all the sacrificed gods are placed here when the tree is applied to the pantheons. God the Father is assigned to Kether, but God the Son is assigned to Tifereth for the reasons given above. 9. Exoteric religion goes no farther up the tree than Tifereth. It has no understanding of the mysteries of creation as represented by the symbolism of Kether, Chokmah, and Bina, nor of the modes of operation of the dark and bright archangels as represented in the symbolism of Gebura and Gedula. Nor of the mysteries of consciousness and the transmutation of force as represented in the invisible Sapphira Dath, which has no symbolism. 10. In Tifereth God is made manifest in form and dwells among us, i.e. comes within range of human consciousness. Tifereth, the Son, shows us Kether, the Father. 11. In order that form may be stabilized, the component forces out of which it is built must be brought into equilibrium. Therefore do we find the idea of the mediator, or redeemer, inherent in this Sapphira. When the Godhead in its very self manifests in form, that form must be perfectly equilibrated. One might with equal truth reverse the proposition and say that when the forces building a form are perfectly equilibrated, the Godhead its very self is manifesting in that form according to its type. God is made manifest among us when the conditions permit of manifestation. 12. Having come through into manifestation on the planes of form in the child aspect of Tifereth, the incarnated God grows to manhood and becomes the Redeemer. In other words, having obtained incarnation by means of matter in a virgin state, i.e. Mary, Mara, the sea, the Great Mother, Bina, a supernal, as distinguished from the inferior mother, Mawkuth, the developing God manifestation, is forever striving to bring the kingdom of the six central Sephiroth into a state of equilibrium. 13. When the glyph of the fall is represented upon the tree, it is interesting to note that the heads of the great serpent that rises out of chaos only come as far as Tifereth and do not overpass it. 14. The Redeemer, then, manifests in Tifereth, and is forever striving to redeem his kingdom by reuniting it to the supernals across the gulf made by the fall, which separated the lower Sephiroth from the higher. And by bringing the diverse forces of the sixfold kingdom into equilibrium. 15. To this end are the incarnated gods sacrificed, dying for the people, in order that the tremendous emotional force set free by this act may compensate the unbalanced force of the kingdom and thus redeem it or bring it into equilibrium. 16. It is this sphere on the tree that is called the Christ center, and it is here that the Christian religion has its focusing point. The pantheistic faiths, such as the Greek and Egyptian, center in Yesod. And the metaphysical faiths, such as the Buddhist and Confucian, aim at Kether. But as all religions worthy of the name have both an esoteric, or mystical, and an exoteric, or pantheistic, aspect, Christianity, although it is essentially a Tifereth faith, has its mystical aspect centering in Kether, and its magical aspect, as seen in popular continental Catholicism, centering in Yesod. Its evangelical aspect aims at a concentration on Tifereth as child and sacrificed God, and ignores the aspect of the king in the center of his kingdom, surrounded by the 5 holy Sephiroth of manifestation. 17. Hitherto we have considered the tree from the macrocosmic point of view, seeing the different archetypes of manifesting force come into action and build the universe. And have but remotely approached them from the microcosmic point of view in their psychological aspect as factors in consciousness. But with Tifereth our mode of approach changes, for from henceforward the archetypal forces are locked up in forms, and can only be approached from the point of view of their effect upon consciousness. In other words, our mode of approach must now be through the direct experience of the senses, though these senses are not of the physical plane only, but function in both Tifereth and Yesod, each according to type. While we were on the higher levels we had to rely on metaphysical analogy and reasoning by deduction from first principles. Now we are within the legitimate field of inductive science, and must submit ourselves to its discipline and express our findings in its terms, but at the same time we must maintain our link with the transcendentals through Tifereth. This is achieved by expressing the symbolism of Tifereth in terms of mystical experience. All mystical experiences of the type in which the vision ends in blinding light are assigned to Tifereth. For the fading out of form in the overwhelming influx of force characterizes the transitional mode of consciousness of this sphere on the tree. Visions which maintain clearly outlined form throughout are characteristic of Yesod. Illuminations which have no form, such as those described by Plotinus, are rising towards Kether. 18. In Tifereth also are gathered up and interpreted the operations of the nature magic of Netzach and the hermetic magic of Hod. Both these operations are in terms of form, though form predominates in the operation of Hod to a greater degree than in those of Netzach. All the astral visions of Yesod also must be translated into terms of metaphysics via the mystical experiences of Tifereth. If this translation is not made, we become hallucinated. For we think the reflections cast into the mirror of the subconscious mind and translated there into terms of brain consciousness are the actual things of which they are really only the symbolic representations. 19. Kether is metaphysical. Yesod is psychic, and Tifereth is essentially mystical, mystical being understood as a mode of mentation in which consciousness ceases to work in symbolic subconscious representations but apprehends by means of emotional reactions. 20. The different additional titles and symbolism assigned to the various Sephiroth, and especially the god names thereof, give us a very important key for the unlocking of the mysteries of the Bible, which is essentially a Kabbalistic book. According to the manner in which deity is referred to, we know to what sphere on the tree the particular mode of manifestation should be assigned. All references to the Son always refer to Tifereth, all references to the Father refer to Kether. All references to the Holy Ghost refer to Yesod, and very deep mysteries are concealed here, for the Holy Ghost is the aspect of the Godhead that is worshipped in the occult lodges. The worship of pantheistic nature forces and elemental operations take place under the presidency of God the Father. And the regenerative ethical aspect of religion, which is the exoteric aspect for this epoch, is under the presidency of God the Son in Tifereth. 21. The initiate, however, transcends his epoch, and aims at uniting all 3 modes of adoration in his worship of deity as a trinity in unity. The Son redeeming the pantheistic nature worship from debasement and making the transcendental Father comprehensible to human consciousness, for, whoso hath seen me hath seen the Father. 22. Tifereth, however, is not only the center of the sacrificed God, but also the center of the inebriating God, the giver of illumination. Dionysus is assigned to this center as well as Osiris, for, as we have already seen, the central pillar is concerned with the modes of consciousness. And human consciousness, rising from Yesod by the path of the arrow, receives illumination in Tifereth, therefore all the givers of illumination in the pantheons are assigned to Tifereth. 23. Illumination consists in the introduction of the mind to a higher mode of consciousness than that which is built up out of sensory experience. In illumination the mind changes gear, as it were. Unless, however, the new mode of consciousness is connected up with the old and translated into terms of finite thought, it remains as a flash of light so brilliant that it blinds. We do not see by means of the ray of light that shines upon us, but by means of the amount of that ray which is reflected from objects of our own dimension upon which it lights. Unless there are ideas in our minds which are illuminated by this higher mode of consciousness, our minds are merely overwhelmed. And the darkness is more intense to our eyes after that blinding experience of a high mode of consciousness than it was before. In fact, we do not so much change gear as throw the engine of our mind out of gear altogether. This, for the most part, is what so-called illumination amounts to. There is enough of a flash to convince us of the reality of superphysical existence, but not enough to teach us anything of its nature. 24. The importance of the Tifereth stage in mystical experience lies in the fact that the incarnation of the child takes place here. In other words, mystical experience gradually builds up a body of images and ideas that are lit up and made visible when illuminations take place. 25. This child aspect of Tifereth is also a very important one to us in such practical work of the mysteries as is concerned with illumination. For we must accept the fact that the child Christ does not spring like Minerva, full-armed from the head of God the Father, but starts as a small thing, humbly laid among the beasts and not even housed in the inn with the humans. The first glimpses of mystical experience must perforce be very limited because we have not had time to build up through experience a body of images and ideas that shall serve to represent them. These can only be got together with time, each transcendental experience adding its quota and subsequent rational meditation organizing them. 26. Mystics are very apt to make the mistake of thinking that they are following the star to the place of the Sermon on the Mount, not to the manger at Bethlehem, the birthplace. It is here that the method of the tree is so valuable, enabling the transcendent to be expressed in terms of symbolism, and symbolism to be translated into terms of metaphysics. Thus linking the psychic with the spiritual via the intellect, and bringing all three aspects of our Trinitarian consciousness into focus. 27. It is in Tifereth that this translation is made, for in Tifereth are received the mystical experiences of direct consciousness which illuminate the psychic symbols. 28. The central pillar of the tree is essentially the pillar of consciousness, just as the two side pillars are the pillars of the active and passive powers. When considered microcosmically, that is to say from the point of view of psychology instead of cosmology, Kether, the divine spark round which the individualized being builds up, must be regarded as the nucleus of consciousness rather than consciousness itself. Dath, the invisible Sapphira, is also on the central pillar, though, strictly speaking, it always belongs to another plane to that on which the tree is being considered. For instance, as we are considering the tree microcosmically at the moment, Dath would be the point of contact with the macrocosm. It is not until we come to Tifereth that we get clear-cut, individualized consciousness. 29. Tifereth is the functional apex of the second triad on the tree, whose two basal angles consist of Gebura and Gedula, Chesed. This second triad, emanating from the first triad of the three supernals, forms the evolving individuality, or spiritual soul. It is this which endures and builds up throughout an evolution. It is from this that the successive personalities, the units of incarnation, are emanated. It is into this that the active essence of experience is absorbed at the end of each incarnation when the incarnating unit dissolves into dust and ether. 30. It is this second triad which forms the Oversoul, the higher self, the holy guardian angel, the first initiator. It is the voice of this higher self which is so often heard with the inner ear, and not the voice of discarnate entities, or of God himself, as is thought by those who have had no training in tradition. 31. Overshadowed and directed by the second triad, the third triad builds up through the experience of incarnation, with Makath as its physical vehicle. Brain consciousness is of Makath, and as long as we are imprisoned in Makath, that is all we have. But the doors of Makath are not closely shut nowadays, and many there are who can peer through the crack at the phantasmagoria of the astral plane and experience the psychic consciousness of Yesod. When this has been achieved, the way opens for the higher psychism, the true seership, which is characteristic of the consciousness of Tifereth. 32. Our first experience of the higher psychism, therefore, is usually in terms of the lower psychism to commence with, for we have only just risen clear of Makath, and are looking up at the sun of Tifereth from the moon sphere of Yesod. Therefore we hear voices with the inner ear and see visions with the inner eye, but they differ from ordinary psychic consciousness because they are not the direct representations of astral forms, but symbolic presentations of spiritual things in terms of astral consciousness. This is a normal function of the subconscious mind, and it is very important that it should be thoroughly understood, for misconceptions on this point give rise to very serious problems and may even lead to mental unbalance. 33. Those who are familiar with Kabbalistic terminology know that the first of the greater initiations is said to consist of the power to enjoy the knowledge and conversation of our holy guardian angel. This holy guardian angel, be it remembered, is really our own higher self. It is the prime characteristic of this higher mode of mentation that it consists neither in voices nor visions, but is pure consciousness. It is an intensification of awareness, and from this quickening of the mind comes a peculiar power of insight and penetration which is of the nature of hyperdeveloped intuition. The higher consciousness is never psychic, but always intuitive, containing no sensory imagery. It is this absence of sensory imagery which tells the experienced initiate that he is on the level of the higher consciousness. 34. The ancients recognized this, and they differentiated between the mantic methods which induced the chthonic, or underworld contacts, and the divine inebriation of the mysteries. The Maenads rushing in the train of Dionysus were of an entirely different order of initiation to the Pythonesses. The Pythonesses were psychics and mediums, but the Maenads, the initiates of the Dionysiac mysteries, enjoyed exaltation of consciousness and a quickening of life that enabled them to perform amazing prodigies of strength. 35. All the dynamic religions have this Dionysiac aspect. Even in the Christian religion many saints have left record of the crucified Christ of their devotion coming to them at last as the divine bridegroom. And when they speak of this divine inebriation that comes to them, their language uses the metaphors of human love as its appropriate expression. How lovely art thou, my sister, my spouse! Faint from the kisses of the lips of God. These things tell a great deal to those who have understanding. 36. The Dionysiac aspect of religion represents an essential factor in human psychology, and it is the misunderstanding of this factor which upon the one hand prevents the manifestation of the higher spiritual experiences in our modern civilization, and upon the other permits of the strange aberrations of religious feeling that from time to time give rise to scandal and tragedy in the high places of the more dynamic religious movements. 37. There is a certain emotional concentration and exaltation which makes the higher phases of consciousness available, and without which it is impossible to attain them. The images of the astral plane pass over into an intensity of emotion that is like a burning fire, and when all the dross of the nature has gone up in flame the smoke clears, and we are left with the white heat of pure consciousness. By the very nature of the human mind, with the brain as its instrument, this white heat cannot endure for long. But in the brief space of its lasting, changes occur in the temperament, and the mind itself receives new concepts and undergoes an expansion that never wholly retracts. The tremendous exaltation of the experience dies away, but we are left with a permanent expansion of personality, an enhanced capacity for life in general, and a power of realization of spiritual realities which could never have been ours if we had not been swung forcibly across the great gulf of consciousness by the momentum of ecstasy. 38. Modern spiritual leaders have no knowledge of the technique of the deliberate production of ecstasy and no idea how to direct it when it occurs spontaneously. Revivalists succeed in producing a mild form of it among unsophisticated people by means of personal magnetism, and the worth of a revivalist is judged by his power to inebriate his hearers. But the consequences of this inebriation are apt to be like the consequences of any other inebriation, and life seems exceedingly stale, flat, and unprofitable when the revivalist moves on to other fields of activity. Because the inebriation dies away, the convert thinks he has lost God. No one seems to realize that ecstasy is a magnesium flash in consciousness, and if it were prolonged, would burn up the brain and nervous system. But although it cannot be, and is not meant to be, prolonged, by means of it we swing over the dead center of consciousness and awake to a higher life. 39. The technique of the tree gives accurate definition to these spiritual experiences, and those who are trained in that technique do not mistake the stirring of their own higher consciousness for the voice of God. From the sensory consciousness of Machath, through the astral psychism of Yesod, to the formless intuitions and quickened consciousness of Tifereth they rise and descend smoothly and skillfully. Never confusing the planes or suffering them to leak one into another, but bringing them all into focus in a centralized consciousness. 40. Tifereth is called by the Kabbalists Shemesh, or the sphere of the sun. And it is interesting to note that all sun gods are healing gods, and all healing gods are sun gods, a fact which affords us food for thought. 41. The sun is the central point of our existence. Without the sun there would be no solar system. Sunlight plays a very important part in the metabolism, the life process, of living creatures, and the whole of the nutrition of green plants depends upon it. Its influence is closely allied to that of vitamins, as is proved by the fact that certain vitamins can be used to supplement its activities. We see, therefore, that sunlight is a very important factor in our well-being. We might go even further and say that it is essential to our very existence and that our association with the sun is far more intimate than we realize. 42. The symbol of the sun in the mineral kingdom is gold, pure and precious, which all nations have agreed in calling the metal of the sun and recognizing as the most precious metal and the basic unit of exchange. The part played by gold in the polity of nations far exceeds its intrinsic utility as a metal. It is, moreover, the one substance on earth which is incorruptible and untarnishable. It may be dulled by the accumulation of dirt upon its surface, but the metal itself, unlike silver or iron, undergoes no chemical change or decomposition. Neither does water corrode it. 43. The sun is to us truly the giver of life and source of all being. It is the only adequate symbol of God the Father, who may aptly be called the sun behind the sun, Tifereth, in fact, being the immediate reflection of Kether. It is through the mediation of the sun that life comes to the earth, and it is by means of the Tiferic consciousness that we contact the sources of vitality and draw upon them, both consciously and unconsciously. 44. The sun is, above all things, the symbol of manifesting energy. It is sudden, unaccustomed gushes of solar spiritual energy that cause the divine inebriation of ecstasy. It is gold, as the basis of money, which is the objective representative of externalized life force, for verily, money is life and life is money, for without money we can have no fullness of life. Life force, manifesting on the physical plane as energy and on the mental plane as intelligence and knowledge, can be transmuted by the appropriate alchemy into money, which is a token of the capacity or energy of someone. Money is the symbol of human energy, by means of which we can store up our output of work hour by hour, receiving it back as wages at the end of the week, and spending it on necessities or saving it for future use as we think fit. The gold which backs the notes is a symbol of human energy, and is only earned by an expenditure of that energy. Though it may be the energy of a father or a husband, transmitted through an heiress, yet nevertheless it is the symbol of some human being's activity in some sphere, even if it be only the sphere of company promoting or burglary. 45. The secret, underground movements of gold act in the polity of nations as hormones act in the human body, and there are cosmic laws governing their tidal and epochal movements which economists do not suspect. 46. Kether, space, the source of all existence, reflects into Tifereth, which acts as a transformer and distributor of the primal, spiritual energy. We receive this energy directly by means of sunlight, and indirectly by means of the chlorophyll in green plants, which enables them to utilize sunlight, and which we eat at first hand in vegetable foods, and at second hand in the tissues of herbivorous creatures. 47. But the sun god is more than the source of life. He is also the healer when life goes wrong. For it is life, plus, minus, or misdirected, which is the activity in disease processes. Disease has no energy save what it borrows from the life of the